Chapter 129. The history of magic ended with Principal Earbook's calm, but humorous introduction. Even after the principal left, the junior magisters were still unsatisfied. The interesting stories of heroes' school days were clearly more fitting for their current state of mind, and it was easier for them to immerse themselves in the story. Even though they had never actually met Hero, after this lesson, they had a vivid image of him in their minds. At the same time, the junior magisters also realized that they were walking the same path as Hero, portraying history and walking into history. They would find that they were also becoming history. Of course, the one who felt this the most was White Gouda. He was immersed in his own thoughts and stayed in the classroom for a long time. Dake, on the other hand, quickly left after the lesson ended. Principal Earbook would continue to tell the story of the hero's growth in the Shungmalian history of magic. The first website was https://m. Vipcanshu. VIP. He was very interested in this and looked forward to the day when the Valkyrie became the main character of the story. But before that, he still had his own things to do. This afternoon, the flower of pride would bear fruit. In the past, he would go straight to the library at this time, but there were always exceptions. He entered the tower, returned to the dormitory, and pushed open the door. Dake bent down and picked up the catnip plant that came to greet him. A small flower pot was tied to its tail like a bow. The flower pot was specially made, and had no openings other than the part that connected the tail. There was also a special filtration device inside the flower pot. This allowed the cat grass to grow normally, and the soil and water would not leak out because of this. Dake reached out and gently scratched the catnip plant from its chin to its neck until it meowed in comfort. He then placed it on a chair, and prepared the equipment for the experiment. Today's experiment was very important. It was the result of half a month of hard work. At the same time, he had an additional idea in his mind. If the experiment with the catnip plant was successful, it was very likely that it would form a system. Before the experiment, Dake first used a magic brain dropper to extract a drop of pride from his brain. With the help of Underworld Godly spell, each drop of pride was still worth 5 points. Together with the remaining 5 from yesterday, he had a total of 2 points of pride. Based on his speculations, these 2 points of pride were more than enough. Next, he used the magic brain pipette again to absorb half the amount from the thinking bottle, which was 1 point of pride, and injected it into the insect branch. The insect branch was more and more like a milk bottle to it, while the cat grass was like a baby waiting to be fed. It clung to the head of the insect branch and sucked desperately. This time Dake didn't look at its expression. Instead, he focused on the flower of arrogance on its head. As the energy of pride was transferred to the fully bloomed flower, it started to grow at an extremely fast speed. There was no pollination process. The flower of pride was directly implanted. The ovary at the lower part of the stamen gradually expanded, and the ovules grew from birth to growth. The gorgeous petals withered and shriveled at a speed visible to the eye. It was obvious. The ovule was absorbing energy. When the flower of pride completely withered, a fruit the size of a longan appeared on the top of the cat grass head. Dake put on a glove and carefully touched the fruit. The surface of the fruit was a little rough, and it was fiery red. However, if one looked closely, they would find a faint dark gold color under the red. On one of the surfaces, the naturally formed pride emblem was unusually conspicuous. He only touched it slightly, and the fruit fell from the stem. It was obviously mature enough. After that, there was only a thin stem left on the top of the cat grass head. Dake wasn't cruel enough to cut off the thin stem. He took the fruit and quickly came to the experiment table. He first placed a glass trough on the table, then placed the fruit in it. He took out a thin and long knife and carefully cut the fruit. Immediately, some white fruit juice flowed out. The inside of the fruit was a viscous semi-liquid. After cutting it open, it emitted a faint aura of light. Dake didn't find any organs similar to a seed in it, which made him a little disappointed. Without a seed, there was no possibility of planting it. It could only be cultivated by feeding the cat grass. To cultivate such a fruit, roughly 7 points of pride were used. 7 points of pride was close to the amount needed to create pride 3. After recording the data collected so far in the form of images, Dake took a deep breath and prepared to start the most crucial experiment. The cultivation method is bird and beast seed, light attribute. The core materials are the fruit of pride and the fairy beast's feather. What needs to be prepared are fairy honey, brain leaf essence, active egg liquid, light attribute powder. Active egg liquid was a kind of egg liquid that had been specially treated to maintain a certain degree of activity. In the basic cultivation method of bird and beast seed, active egg liquid was an indispensable part. Once everything was ready, it was time for the official experiment. Dake didn't hesitate to use a blank magic card with 50 credits. Soon, he spread the fairy honey evenly on the blank magic card and poured a drop of brain leaf essence on it. After it was slightly dried, he applied a layer of transparent yellow, active egg liquid, and sprinkled the light attribute powder on it to draw the number 7 array. The number 7 array would allow the materials to gradually merge into the magic card. Because this was an experiment that he only had one chance to do, Dark was fully focused, and every step was meticulous to the extreme. Therefore, after spending close to 1.5 hours, he only made an exquisite semi-finished magic card. The last step was the refinement of the core materials. He changed the mercury axis of the magic pen to silver cat's blood, and began to draw the number 1 array. The silver cat was a type of magical beast with general attributes. The nature of its blood was close to mercury in terms of magic conduction, but it was more precious than mercury. It also had additional biological properties, and was suitable for making most of the magic elven cards of the cat family. Fruit of pride, archangel's feather, silver cat's blood. All these preparations were to guide the final product to the Dilu beast. When the number 1 array was completed, Dake even faintly heard a meow. First, he poured the most important fruit of arrogance into the refining array. When the fruit of pride gradually sank into the light array, he picked up the fairy beast's feather. The moment the archangel's feather came into contact with the light of the array, it instantly released an intense white light. When doing this step, Dake was actually a little hesitant. The fruit of pride was cultivated from a great sin, but the fairy beast's feather was of the holy attribute. In theory, the two attributes were mutually exclusive. Once there was a rejection during the refinement process, it was very likely to fail. The time cost was secondary. The main thing was that both the fruit of pride and the fairy beast's feather were too precious. Especially the latter, it was basically difficult to find another one. Therefore, this experiment could be said to be a one-time success. There was no turning back. If this refinement is successful, it can basically prove that the nature of the great sin and the holy attribute are not in conflict. Dake suppressed his nervousness and carefully placed the fairy beast's feather into the white light. The pure white feather seemed to have touched the surface of the water, causing slight ripples. Without any rejection, the archangel's feather was integrated into the array. Everything went terrifyingly smoothly. After absorbing the fruit of pride and the archangel's feather, the light emitted by array number 1 reached its peak. After a moment of stalemate, Dake had an idea and added a few more strands of cat fur. In an instant, the light burst out and receded. All the materials were integrated and refined. The glowing threads that drilled out from the card surface gradually weaved into a white cocoon. The refinement was complete. No matter what the final product was, at least the experiment was a success. Dake breathed a sigh of relief and quietly waited for the final formation of the magic card. 2 minutes later, the magic waves emitted from the white cocoon gradually subsided. Dake took out a mercury knife and injected magic into it, preparing to cut the cocoon open. However, when the blade came into contact with the magical power, the white cocoon spread out in all directions like silk, and a pure white magic card was revealed. The cat in the card surface opened its eyes. At first, it was at a loss for words. Then it suddenly focused and its gaze became sharp. It crossed its arms in front of its chest and raised its chin slightly. Its gaze penetrated the card surface as if it was saying in an arrogant tone, "You are my master?" Chapter 130. Card name, Diru Beast. Type, Elf card. Level, ********. Race, Bird Beast. Attribute, Light Element, Magic Power, 1500. Attack, 1900, Defense, 900, Ultimate Skill, Sacred Ring, Cat Fist, Cat Eye. It was almost the same panel as the Diru Beast. Remember the URL. Invip, can't you? 6, but it had 3 ultimate skills, which was second only to the gold card. Dake looked at the orange halo on the edge of the card, and was slightly happy. Dake, who had experienced the bug in the gold card Kettle, had a clear understanding of the differences between the white, blue, purple, orange and gold cards. He immediately picked up the Magic Elf card and looked at it carefully. The Diru Beast's attack power was as high as 1900, making it one of the top 4 Magic Elf cards, top 2000. Although its defense was slightly lacking, 1500 magic power was not a small amount. The most important thing was that it had 3 ultimate skills. For the Magic Elf, the ultimate skills were its true soul. Dake was full of anticipation as he injected a trace of magic power into the Magic Elf card. Soon he got a response. Sacred Ring, passive skill. The Diru Beast's Sacred Ring is the proof of its sacred element. It also makes its power stronger. Magic power plus 500, attack plus 500, defense plus 500. Cat Fist. Wave its long claws and tear the enemy apart. Cat Eye. Emit a light from its eyes like a red wheel, causing the enemy to fall into confusion and have a chance to attack itself. Sacred Ring. The Diru Beast was different. The Diru Beast was a precious beast with a sacred coefficient. Every sacred coefficient beast had a sacred ring engraved with the words Digital Monster. The sacred ring was not only a symbol of status, but also a powerful tool that contains sacred power. Every sacred ring could increase the magic power, attack, and defense of the sacred coefficient beast by 500 each. In the anime, the Diru Beast was able to display its full strength at the mature stage. It relied on the sacred ring on its tail, and the pair of gloves that copied the data of the golden sword lion's claws. In short, the Diru Beast walked the path of crushing with equipment in the early stage. Now that the Holy Ring had appeared as a passive skill, it had also given the Diru Beast a strength that surpassed the stars. Dake pondered for a moment, and deduced that this was probably the power obtained from the Fairy Lady Beast's feather. With the Holy Ring, the Diru Beast can be treated as a 4-star card. As for the remaining 2 skills, one was an offensive skill, while the other was a status control skill. Both were pretty good. In general, this Diru Beast was unexpectedly strong. While Dake was very satisfied, he quickly thought about how to summon it during a duel. If he used a normal summoning technique to summon a 4-star Diru Beast, he would need more than a minute to summon it. However, if he wanted to use the sacrificial summoning technique, he would have to gather enough 4-star sacrificial spirits. Dake listed all the magic guiding fairies he owned. Magical Beast. Ibu Trash Slime, Kettle Dilu Beast. I need a Kettle. And any one of the 1-star cards to use the sacrificial summoning technique? Dake took out the magic guiding card and tried to use the sacrificial summoning technique. In the end, it took more than 20 seconds to summon it successfully. It was a race against time in the magic guiding duel. If it took 20 seconds to summon a high-star magic guiding fairy, the magic guiding ball would have been blown up. Therefore, it was very important to use the first-tier magic guiding fairy as a foundation. In a real battle, the opponent would not give you too much time to use the summoning technique. First, summon 1 to 3-star magic guiding fairies and cooperate with other types of magic guiding cards to protect the formation. When you had enough sacrificial offerings, you would look for an opportunity to summon 4 to 6 magic guiding fairies. This was the normal way of low-level battles. While he was thinking, the Diru Beast had turned into a physical body in the light. This was a white cat with blue vertical pupils. Other than cute, Dake could not think of any other adjectives to describe it. Even though Dark saw a familiar light in its eyes, he knew that it wasn't going to give up. He could not help but reach out to touch it. Pa! His hand was slapped away. The Diru Beast looked at him with disdain, as if it was looking at an LSP. Are you the one who created Meow? The Diru Beast crossed its arms and looked up and down at the man who was nominally its master. It nodded slightly. Not bad, Meow. At least in terms of appearance and temperament, you did not embarrass Meow. After speaking, the Diru Beast began to wander around the dormitory. It was as if it wanted to leave its scent in every corner of this territory. Although the Shungmalian dormitory was spacious, it was only a dormitory after all. Dake's dormitory did not have any extravagant decorations. This made the Diru beast not very satisfied. Especially after seeing the cat grass, it could not help but frown. Why is there another meow here? The cat grass tilted its head and said, meow. Although Dake wanted to tell the Diru beast that this cat grass could be said to be its mother in a sense, he held back in the end. Fortunately, although the Diru beast was arrogant, it was also rational and did not make things difficult for the cat grass. Dake carefully observed its performance and gradually determined that this Diru beast's intelligence level was at least 3. After all, this is a magic guide elf made from the fruit of pride. There is no need to try Pride I and Pride II, but Bliss 3 is necessary. Dake waved his hand. Diru beast, come here. Under normal circumstances, the magic guide elf card could not go against the will of the owner. Although the Diru beast was unwilling, it still walked over. Dake took a deep breath and took out Bliss 3 from the card pack, then activated Summon. Meow. The Diru beast stared at the pink card, and suddenly felt a trace of uneasiness. The moment the light shone, it let out a sharp shriek, exerted force in its legs, and bounced away instantly. But the pink light from Bliss 3 lit up every corner of the dormitory. There was nowhere for it to run. After being caught by the light, the Diru beast tried to break free for a moment. But the emblem of a great crime quickly lit up on its forehead. First it was pride, then bliss. The two emblems alternated. Dake could clearly see that its body was turning into light under the intertwining of the two great crimes. It was like when the little demon beast evolved into a demoness. Its form began to change into a human female form. Could it be? Dake became excited. But when the evolution process reached a certain point, the light of evolution suddenly shattered. The half-transformed human form returned to its cat form. After the Diru beast landed, it suddenly covered its forehead and a trace of darkness appeared in its eyes. The evolution failed? Dake was stunned. Chapter 131. Although the phenomenon in front of him was unexpected, Dake didn't stay stunned for too long. After he came back to his senses, he immediately drew the outline of the light humanoid that evolved from the Diru beast. It wasn't an 8-winged angel like the fairy beast, nor was it a distinctive outline like the demon beast. Instead, it was a slender humanoid figure with 2 cat ears and 2 cat tails. Dake's understanding of Digimon was limited. He frowned and looked at it for a long time, but he couldn't recognize the main body from the outline. It's not a fairy beast nor a demon beast? What else can the Diru beast evolve into? A Nephidi beast? That's not right. Aw. My head hurts. Just as he was worrying about this, the Diru beast's eyes were filled with the extreme bliss aura that couldn't be dispersed. It covered its head and curled into a ball. Pride and bliss were entangled. Light and darkness were fighting. Remember, https://m, vipcanshu. VIP. The chaos gradually intensified. When Dake noticed it, her eyes had turned black and white. Pride had also changed. This phenomenon? Dake quickly hugged the Diru beast and observed it carefully. Although the Diru beast snorted slightly, it didn't show any signs of rejection. The man and the cat were very close to each other. Until a cold tongue slid across his cheek, Dake finally confirmed the Diru beast's current state. He grabbed the Diru beast's tail and gently stroked it. Although the refining materials include the fruit of pride, the sacred ring on the Diru beast's tail still shows that it belongs to the light side. And Bliss 3 can make the little demon beast evolve into a black Diru beast. It can be seen that it belongs to the dark side. One black and one white. Is it the fusion of light and darkness? The combination of angel and demon? The Modi's beast? That's not right. The Modi's beast is the ultimate form. It's the combination of a fairy beast and a demon beast, not the Diru beast. And could it be that the Diru beast and the black Diru beast can also combine to evolve? Dake's eyes lit up. He felt that he had finally grasped the key to the matter. Although the evolution failed this time, it indicated a possibility. It was just like how the fairy beast and the demoness beast could fuse and evolve into the ultimate form. The Diru beast and the Heidi Road beast should also be able to fuse and evolve into a complete form. The next question was how to fuse the Diru beast and the Black Diru beast. Fusion? Is there such a card in this world? Dake thought as he stroked the cat naturally. Although the Diru beast's mouth was tightly twisted, its expression clearly showed its enjoyment. Dake suddenly felt his trousers move. He lowered his head and picked up the catnip plant. Hugging left and right, the Diru beast maintained its tsundere state for about 16 minutes before it woke up with a meow. However, even though its eyes had returned to normal, it still lay on Dake's knee without moving. Omega? Evening. The students came to the cafeteria earlier than usual. The double homework was obviously not enough to dampen their enthusiasm for adventure. Dake sat by the window and ate. He could hear the students on both sides talking about tonight's adventure in the secret passage. Even though the senior students were allowed to explore the underground city during the weekend, the secret passage in the castle was different from the underground city. From the information that he occasionally heard, it was not only Dake and Ai Ma who had gained something. It seemed like someone had found a lost painting, an ancient book, a special magic tool. Even though those things disappeared after a while, they were still treasures that aroused people's desire. Even if they were useless, they could still be talked about and flaunted for a while. Not to mention, some ancient objects were indeed extraordinary. Dake came to the library again with a clear goal. He needed a curse cage card and also a fusion card. Curse cage definitely existed, but fusion needed to be researched. However, before that, as a student, he had to do his part. In today's 3 classes, other than the first arithmetic class, Introduction to Magic was only given tasks, and History of Magic was not given any homework. But just the math homework alone was enough for her to outdo 3 of them. Although the Introduction to Magic class mission seemed unremarkable, it actually required a lot of time to complete. Dake had already finished the exercise book, but it still took him 15 minutes to finish the rest of the homework. It was hard to imagine how long the other first-year students would take, not to mention the other students who were twice as late. So full of malice. After Dake complained, he put away his homework and prepared to walk out of the reading room and explore the sea of bookshelves. However, Ai Ma had been observing him. She immediately rushed over when he finished his homework. After being reminded by her, Dark remembered this matter and lent her the notes that he had copied from the murals. Ai Ma was delighted when she received the notebook. She bowed slightly and thanked him. "Thank you. When the research results are out, I will share them with you." Dake, Ai Ma had already returned to her desk. She bit her pen and began to struggle with the materials that she found earlier. She seemed to know more about the mural than Dake. She already had a goal in mind. Dake looked at the materials and found that they were historical records of a certain era. The Shungmalian library collected almost all the books in the world. Students could always find the books they wanted. Dake did not think there was a problem before, but now that he knew the location of the castle and part of its meaning, he was terrified. 3 hours later, Dake walked out of the sea of bookshelves with 2 books in his hands. One was the 3,000 Uses of the Curse Cage. The other was on the extraordinary characteristics of the fusion card set. Sure enough, there was fusion in this world. A duel without fusion was not a duel at all. It was late at night. There was almost no one in the reading room. There was only a girl with fluffy hair and a blonde boy in the corner. It was very quiet. There was only the sound of the pen touching the paper. In the common room of the aristocrat house, Deanna was playing magic chess with Luo Si. Although she lost again and again, she kept on fighting. The 2 of them did homework in the library for 2 hours, but the homework helper was lost in the sea of bookshelves. In the end, they did not even see each other. Deanna was not very interested. She asked casually, "Luo Si, which of the 5 universal spells are you going to do first?" Luo Si frowned and thought for a while. "I want to do the Fade spell, but it seems to be very difficult. Maybe I should start with something simple, like the Push spell?" Deanna, "Oh, that seems to be the case. I also wanted to do the Blink spell, but I don't think I can do it well." Luo Si nodded. "The Blink spell is also good. It can flash forward 1 to 3 meters. It has a high tactical value." Deanna, Let's do the magic bullet spell. Chapter 132. 10 o'clock sharp. When Dake came out of the library, he bumped into the crowd returning from the secret passage. The fairies were so dense that they covered the sky and the earth, urging the students to return to the dormitory, as if they were escorting criminals. I don't know when this wave will pass. Dake shook his head and leaned against the window, waiting for the crowd to pass. The moonlight was not affected at all, and was still as clear as water. Half of his face was illuminated by the light, and he saw White and Luo boat hurriedly passing by the external bridge. Remember the last astronomy class was also in this position? Dake faintly recalled the memory, and then he couldn't help but shake his head. The next day, Friday. Aristocrat House, Common Room. Website. https://m. Vipcanshu. VIP as usual. Dake enjoyed the breakfast brought by the little demon. This morning's Great Sage Daily finally mentioned the incident that happened at the Shung Malian Academy. Although the school tried hard, it didn't seem to have much effect. The Great Sage Daily still listed the incident as the headline, and the banner on the front page was pasted with the picture of the principal of ARTI. However, the angle from which this incident attracted attention was slightly different from what Dake had imagined. The condemnation of the fairies was not as strong as expected. It seemed that the fairies themselves were unreliable, so people didn't think it was surprising. Only some parents were surprised that the academy appointed fairies as professors. However, due to the Treaty of the 100 Races Alliance signed during the war, the kingdom's aristocrats couldn't openly criticize this. People were more thankful that the students who were affected by the explosion were safe and sound. The academy submitted the name list of the students involved to the court, but the court didn't release it due to confidentiality regulations. Only the name of Mr. Haixing appeared in the public document. The whole incident fermented for a whole day, and the most intense words came from the saint, who had nothing to do with it. Moreover, the angle of the saint's condemnation was quite strange. They actually accused the principal of ARTI of slandering the moon god. Dake couldn't help but laugh when he saw this. The so-called moon god was actually a very general name. Any god related to the moon could be called a moon god. One of the more famous ones was the moon-hunting goddess, who was the ancestor of the principal of ARTI. In the ancient myths and legends, some gods that descended to the earth lived with humans. Their bloodline was passed down through normal reproduction. Although it was diluted from generation to generation, there were still a few people who had a higher purity of the god's bloodline. The principal of ARTI was one of them. The spokesperson of the Holy Church could have accused anyone else, but he had to accuse the descendant of the moon god of tarnishing the name of the transformed moon god. Dark continued to flip through the newspaper, and saw a clarification post about yesterday's headlines in a small corner. After reading up to this point, Dark seemed to have thought of something. He turned back to look at the report about the moon goddess, and fell into a short period of contemplation. If the principal of ARTI was still busy last night, then who was teaching the history of magic class yesterday afternoon? It can't be hers. Time passed by quickly. When Dake put down the newspaper, the branch card in his wallet suddenly vibrated. He took it out and looked at it. It was dual class location notice. Dual classes were usually held in the classroom, but sometimes they would be held in the dual hall. Professor Cheong-si would inform him in advance every time there was a change of classroom. I wonder what Professor Cheong-si will talk about in the dual class. After experiencing the fierce battle with the moon goddess, Dake's expectations for the dual class increased slightly. However, when the first-year students of the 4 branches entered Dual Hall 2 at the same time, what awaited them was a high-intensity physical training class. Professor Cheong-si seemed to think that the students' poor physical fitness wasn't enough to deal with the crisis they might encounter, or simply thought that they had too much energy and had nowhere to release it. In short, during this class she fiercely drilled the first-year students. The students with weaker physical strength suffered unspeakably. Some gritted their teeth and held on, stubborn and beautiful. Some people protested, but were ignored. It wasn't until halfway through the class that two students suddenly fainted that Professor Cheong-si temporarily stopped the physical training and sent the two students to the infirmary as quickly as possible. About 15 minutes later, Professor Cheong-si returned to the classroom. A student of the Noble Academy immediately made things difficult, loudly reprimanding her for being inhumane, and then received the reward of 2 training missions. Professor Cheong-si furrowed her brows in thought. Several other students asked her about the physical condition of the 2 people who were sent to the infirmary. Professor Cheong-si was puzzled. It's strange, Sister Ka Lien said that they fainted because of long-term malnutrition. But our cafeteria is the battlefield of halfling chefs. Don't they eat? When a night student who was close to one of the 2 claimed that the halfling was a big eater, Professor Cheong-si was even more puzzled. But the little magisters didn't escape the following training because of this. The 2 students didn't faint because of the training either. This matter seemed to become a mystery, one that would always be difficult to explain in the life of the academy. At the end of the class, Professor Cheong-si arranged for the students to write a long paper on the importance of physical strength in magical duels. At the same time, she said that she would hold a second in-class competition before Christmas. In any case, this morning's duel class couldn't be considered pleasant. The 2 people who fainted were Isaac from the School of Magic and Wagner from the School of Knights. Wagner was the big eater that the students of the School of Knights called. He was strong and sturdy, and didn't look malnourished at all. Therefore, some of the students thought that Professor Cheong-si was looking for an excuse to avoid responsibility, and even called the students to go to the infirmary to verify this matter. But in fact, most of the students had lost their mobility because of the high-intensity training. Some of them didn't even eat lunch and slept until the afternoon. Dake's physical strength could only be considered above average, and he also almost fell asleep in the bathtub. On the contrary, Deanna and Luo Boat finally showed their advantages, and were still lively after the training. In short, after this incident, Dake began to consider whether or not to make morning exercises a part of his daily routine. 11:30. Dake dragged his sore body to the cafeteria and reluctantly ate a bowl of noodles, and then began to wait for the opening of Traveler's Street. This trip to Traveler's Street, he had more credits than ever before. The things he needed to buy were also more than ever. Chapter 133. Ever since he found out that the stone block in the pavilion in the middle of the lake was a switching hub, Dake had always wanted to experience the feeling of virtual and real. But as expected, apart from the slight dizziness caused by the spinning, he didn't feel anything else. He patted his abnormally sore thighs and tried his best to move. First of all, the materials needed to make the 5 universal magic spells. Dake took out his notebook, which had already recorded a detailed list of materials. Apart from the flash spell, which required a blank magic card of 50 credits, the other 4 magic spells only required a magic card of 10 credits. Moreover, the basic materials used for these 5 universal magic spells were very similar, and many of the materials could be used. The difficult part was the part that wasn't the foundation. It was the special ink that was poured into the magic pen to write the magic language, and the core materials that gave the magic card special properties. According to Dake's estimation, the credits needed to buy the materials for these 5 magic cards were roughly as follows. Remember the website. VIP can't you? 6 1 magic bullet spell. 100 credits 2 push spell. 200 credits 3 obstacle spell. 300 credits 4 fade spell. 400 credits 5 flash spell. 1000 credits among them. The flash spell was obviously more difficult to make than the other 4 magic spells by more than 1 level. The materials needed to make the flash spell were also very expensive. Students had to choose a suitable magic card according to their credit limit and the strength of their abilities, and they had to complete it in the Introduction to Magic class on Monday. Of course, the main purpose of the class was to learn how to brand a magic spell on a magic card. As long as they learned this important step, they could continue to make other magic cards according to their own needs. Dake originally wanted to try to buy a complete set of materials from the Wind Traveler's material store, but the shop owner told him that the school had specifically instructed not to sell the materials. Looks like they want to train the students' ability to identify, collect, and buy materials. Dake shook his head and started to run around. There were many people like him who came to buy materials despite their soreness, and they often met students with the same goal after entering a store. However, from the looks of it, the students were all short of money and had worried looks on their faces. Dake looked at his credit limit. He was also embarrassed, so he only bought one set of materials for the flicker incantation, and 2 sets for each of the other 4 incantations. No one could guarantee that they would succeed on their first attempt. Dake had actually experienced many failed experiments, so it was better to buy an extra set just in case. By the time all the materials had been prepared, a cloud of fire had appeared on the horizon. Dake returned home with bags of various sizes, making the other students of the same grade envious. After dinner, Dake returned to the Traveler's Street after putting the materials back in his dormitory. Although Traveler Street was still lively tonight, there were obviously fewer people than before. But after thinking about it carefully, it was normal. After all, some of the first-year students were still lying in the dormitory. A portion of the students were tied down by homework. There were also some students who were still addicted to exploring secret passages. The professor's strategy was somewhat effective. Fewer people ventured into the secret passageway. There were more students of the same grade going out after dinner than at noon. However, there was still no sign of AI Ma or most of the girls from the magic department. They clearly hadn't recovered yet. By the way, Deanna was obediently staying in the dormitory because she had to take care of Luo C. Dake was glad about this. He was still smiling when he met White and Luo Boat. "Hi, Dake." White greeted him as usual. "Are you also here to buy materials?" Dake nodded slightly. "Yes, you too?" White smiled. "Of course. Professor Cheongxi's training is really hard. If only I had Luo Boat's physique." Luo Boat was slightly proud. "It's no big deal." White added, "I'm going to buy materials for the flicker incantation, because I'm worried that it will fail." Dake, "Don't worry about it. Failure is not scary. As long as you can learn from failure to success, any loss is worth it." White, "I'm relieved to hear that." So White and Luo Boat went to buy materials for the magic spell card. Dake went to buy materials for the spell cage and fusion. The spell cage and fusion belonged to the category of high-level magic cards, and they were very special. They were magic cards that had the foundation of the magic elven card. Using the spell cage could temporarily seal demonic spirits, golems, and other simulated life forms and use them as magic elven cards. As for using fusion, it could fuse 2 or more fusion material magic elves into one. The difficulty of making these 2 magic cards was very high, and the price of the materials was more than 1,500 credits. Although Dake found the list of materials to make these 2 magic cards from the 3,000 uses of the spell cage, and on the extraordinary characteristics of the Fusion series card set, he wasn't confident that he could make them successfully. In order to complete the making of these 2 magic cards, he had to learn the magic language by himself. Buying materials in advance was just to be able to start the experiment at any time. However, the materials for these 2 magic cards were very difficult to find, so Dake had to continue looking for them the next day. It wasn't until noon on Saturday that Dake had collected all the materials for the 2 magic cards. After lunch, Dake came to the Cat flower shop. The necessary materials for making magic cards have been collected. Next, I can finally start to study my own system. The success of making the Diru beast gave him a lot of inspiration. In his opinion, the value of the cat grass was no less than a high-level alchemy tool. In layman's terms, after using the cat grass to cultivate the great sin into a fruit, it could give the great sin fruit certain biological characteristics. For example, frowny face pride plus catgrass cat equals pride fruit cat. It could be used to refine a magic elven cat. But what if he used other types of catgrass? For example, frowny face fury plus catgrass carp equals fury fruit carp. Then could he use the fury fruit carp to refine a carp king that could rely on fury to evolve? Or could he use the greed fruit cat to refine a meow meow that could rely on greed to evolve? The process of exploring the unknown was fascinating. Dake's enthusiasm for this kind of research was obviously higher than others. It had been half a month since he last entered the cat flower shop. There were also a few more types of cat grass in the shop. According to the shop assistant, these should be the types that the customers had a good response to. Is the cobra that I met before gone? I don't know if it was taken back or bought by someone. Dake walked around a little and couldn't help but squat down, picking up a ragdoll cat and rubbing against it. Meow, the cat grass was really irresistible. Chapter 134. The shop assistant was in her early 20s. Her hair was tied up behind her head with a hairband. She wore an apron and gloves. She looked very plain. The students liked to call her Miss Cat. Miss Cat still remembered this blonde boy. She had a good memory. As long as she bought cat grass from the shop, she would remember it. Seeing that the young man was so immersed in the cats that he couldn't extricate himself, she didn't disturb him. She just curved her thin eyes and watched softly. Cats were a gift from the heavens. She didn't hate anyone who liked cats. After half an hour of cuddling, Dark reluctantly put down the kitten on his lap. Apart from cats, there were only a few types of cat grass on display in the shop. These types of cat grass had a good response, but Dake needed other types of cat grass for reference. Since there wasn't much pride left, the next experiment should be the fruit of bliss. Remember, https://m, VIP can't you? VIP as for the animals that were compatible with bliss, and the moon, it was easy to think of foxes, wolves, rabbits, or maybe vampires, succubi? Considering that he wanted to raise them in the dormitory, it was best to raise them with a small and quiet size. For example, rabbit grass? In fact, rabbit grass was a good choice. Quiet and timid. Easy to raise. Whether it was in myths and legends, or in the many Digimon and Pokemon in this world, there were many species that were based on rabbits. Dake had his own ideas. He was very interested in the Diana Beast, the moon god of Digimon's 12 Olympian gods. The Diana Beast's growth stage, the moon god beast, Luna Beast, was based on rabbits. On the other hand, even though he used the fruit of pride to create a Diru Beast, Dake still had fantasies about the sun god of Digimon's 12 Olympian gods, the Apollo Beast. The Diana Beast and the Apollo Beast symbolized the moon and the sun respectively. Not only were they ultimate forms, but they could also merge and evolve into the elegant Nova Beast. If he could use the fruit of Elysium and the fruit of pride to create the moon god and the sun god, it would be of great significance to the analysis of the major sins. Also, Pokemon also had moon beasts and sun beasts. They were the moon emissary Lunala, who was based on a bat, and the sun emissary Sorgario, who was based on a lion. Of course, the above only existed in the fantasy stage. Considering that Dake didn't find the rabbit grass in the shop assistant's secret room last time, nothing was certain yet. After he put down the catnip plant, he went to the shop assistant and said, "Miss Cat, I want to raise another type of catnip plant. Can you show me the new test subject?" The shop assistant naturally wouldn't refuse. "Of course you can. How's your pot of catnip grass?" Dake smiled. "Of course it's very healthy." The shop assistant turned around and led him to the secret room that he had entered last time. Although Dake had been here once, he still couldn't adapt to the environment in this secret room. There were more catnip plants than the last time he was here, and they were densely placed in the room. Among them, the most eye-catching one was still the huge snapdragon grass. The shop assistant obviously took good care of the snapdragon grass. It was getting fatter and fatter. Around the snapdragon grass, the other types of catnip plants were also very healthy. Dark endured the discomfort in his heart and began to search through the pile of catnip grass. The shop assistant said happily, "How is it?" "Actually, the customer's response has been very good recently, so we added more improved products. For example, the cow grass can not only be raised as a pet, but it can also be used to produce juice to satisfy the customer's daily demand of a cup." Fruit juice? Dake's eyelids twitched. The catnip plant that the shop assistant pointed at was a small cow that was only knee-high, so the juice she was talking about, Dake couldn't help but murmur, "Maybe it can be used to make milk cans." The shop assistant said, "What?" Dake said, "No, nothing. I was just thinking, why don't we have the rabbit grass, which looks very popular?" The shop assistant said awkwardly. We are developing it. Well, actually, we haven't solved the problem of the rabbit grass being scared to death by high decibels. Dake said. You can do that? The shop assistant shrugged. We can't help it. The rabbit grass is just that timid. Dake thought for a while and said, when this problem is solved, can I order one? The shop assistant said happily, of course. Dake looked around the secret room for a while and asked curiously, is there a lion-cat grass? The shop assistant said, we haven't solved the lion-cat grass's bad habit of biting people. Dake said, girl's word. I'll order one too. Things didn't go as smoothly as Dake had imagined. The so-called test products were almost equivalent to defective products. Not to mention the rabbit grass and the lion-cat grass that hadn't been developed yet. Most of the cat grass in the secret room had biological defects. They weren't like the original cat grass, which had been developed with mature technology. Among them, the ones that had complete biological characteristics were some of the more lingering varieties. For example, the most conspicuous snapdragon grass and the little cow mentioned earlier. In short, there were no foxes, rabbits, or bats. But there were dogs and rats. The dogs were puppies that were similar to English bulldogs. The rats were brown-furred ratty rats. Dake couldn't imagine what kind of tragedy would happen if he stuffed a puppy and a ratty rat into the house, when he already had a cat grass at home. But that snapdragon grass was just too creepy. And he didn't want to raise cows in the dormitory. Not to mention spider grass and scorpion grass. Just thinking about it made him panic. When he had his own club and studio in the future, he might consider these. But raising them in the dormitory was just too much. How about that little cow? Maybe I can really use this to cultivate a big milk can? And the juice produced by the cat grass can be put into a pot for re-fermentation. Maybe it can produce juice with special effects? Now that I think about it, I suddenly think it'll work. And the cat grass won't grow. This little cow isn't even knee-high. It's not bad to raise it as a pet cow. Dake tried hard to convince himself. In the end, considering the sustainable development strategy, he made the final decision. After the improvement of the rabbit grass is completed, you must save one for me. Dake made another reservation with the shop assistant, and returned to the dormitory with a pot of cat grass. Chapter 135. 3 in the afternoon. Dake put down the dairy cow rearing manual and placed the pot of milkweed on the table. The structure of the milkweed was very similar to the traditional cat grass. They both had a vine-like stem that extended from the tail and were planted in the pot. According to the shop assistant, the milkweed was very gentle. It liked to be quiet and didn't like to move. It was more suitable to be raised in the dormitory. However, to ensure that it could produce a cup of milk every day, it needed to be fed with a special magic potion. The price of the magic potion was very similar to the magic potion used to cultivate the insect tree. It was about 30 credits per bottle, and could be used for a month. As such, Dake spent a lot of credits on raising the milkweed and insect tree every month. Dake put his hand on the milkweed's head. The little cow raised its head and used its round horns to rub against Dake's palm. It looked very obedient. This made Dake feel less repulsed by the fact that he was raising a cow in the dormitory. He then followed the instructions in the dairy cow rearing manual and tried to squeeze the milk for the little cow for the first time. Because the milkweed was very gentle, the whole process was very smooth. After squeezing all the milk, there was just enough for 1 cup. Website: https://m.vip. VIP. The milk of the milkweed was a natural milk drink. Not only did it not have too many impurities, it also had a natural fragrance. Dake dipped his finger in it and tasted it. It tasted like fruit milk, but it wasn't that sweet. In general, if you added some sugar to taste it, it would be a very good milk drink. Good girl. Dake touched the little cow's head to show his appreciation. He then took out Kettle Pot and used the usual summoning spell. The next step was to appraise the value of the milkweed. Could the milk of the milkweed be treated as fruit juice and be referment? Beezy. The newly summoned Kettle Pot stretched its head out and rubbed against Dake's hand. Dake stroked its chin and neck back and forth, making it so comfortable that it closed its eyes. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Dake poured the cup of milk into the hole in kettle pot shell. In less than 2 minutes, the cup of milk was completely fermented. Dake placed a new glass of milk on the table and summoned the little demon beast. Then, she used a silver spoon to scoop up a small spoonful of milk and fed it. The little demonic beast opened its mouth and smacked it, while a trace of unsatisfied expression appeared on its face. "How is it?" Dake asked with concern. The little demonic beast shook its head. "The taste is all right, but I can't taste its specific effects. It's too little." Dake scooped another spoonful and fed it. "Is this enough?" The little demonic beast. "Majimoto." "Dake-ha?" The little demonic beast. "Majimoto." "Dake-ha?" The little demonic beast. "Majimoto." In the blink of an eye, half a cup of milk was gone, and the little fiendish beast was still Majimoto. Dake's face darkened. He poked the spoon into Dake's mouth and took a sip from the cup. Instantly, an indescribable sweetness flowed into his heart. It had the mellowness of the milk and the freshness of the fruit. It left a rich aftertaste. Gradually, the aftertaste spread throughout his body. His heart was slightly restless, and his limbs that were still sore from the high-intensity training gradually regained some vitality. Dake suddenly realized that the milk's effect was to replenish vitality. After the blue fruit's mana recovery and the white dried fruit's HP recovery, there was finally a juice that could restore vitality. This milk obviously couldn't be drunk before bed, but it was a good choice as a supplement after morning training. Dake drank the rest of the milk in one gulp and energetically began his next experiment. Basically, he needed to confirm that the blossoming and bearing fruit wasn't a specialty of the catgrass. Only then could he continue his research. It was very simple to confirm this. He just needed to feed the milk cow grass a little bit of great sin, and he would be able to see the general effect. Thus, he carried the milk cow grass to the balcony and opened the protective fence protecting the insect tree, so that the milk cow grass could come into contact with the insect tree. Within the insect tree, there were 2 branches that were in a semi-hard and semi-soft state. One of the branches at the top had an unused 1 point of pride stored in it. Inside a branch at the bottom of the tree was the 1.5 points of bliss that he had drawn yesterday. Since his target was the fruit of bliss, he only allowed the milk cow grass to suck on the branch that contained the bliss. Great Sin indeed had an unusual charm. The milk cow grass only tried to lick it once, and it was already infatuated with the branch. It stuck out its pink little tongue and tried to suck on it. Meow. Dake hugged the cat grass that was trying to get closer and held it in his arms. A few minutes later, a faint bliss emblem appeared on the top of the milk cow grass's head, and a small bump grew out. This made Dake feel relieved. Then he extracted the 1.5 points of bliss and fed it through the branch, causing the bump on the milk cow grass's head to grow small buds. Today is the 4th of November. Dake looked at the time and estimated the time for the next harvest. According to the efficiency of blooming at 6 o'clock and fruiting at 7 o'clock, I still need 4 points of bliss. I can extract 1.5 points every day, and it will take 3 days. Next Tuesday. With a hint of anticipation, Dake closed the gate of the insect tree under the cat grass's despairing gaze. Sunday morning. Dake planned his route and spent an extra 15 minutes on his morning run. After the run, he took a shower and drank a cup of freshly squeezed milk. He was instantly energized. At this time, the little devil monster delivered breakfast to him. Dake didn't go to the common room. Instead, he ate in his bedroom and read the newspaper. After reading the newspaper, his hair was almost dry, and it was time for him to welcome the new day with a new look. From this afternoon onwards, Dake started to learn the magic language on his own. His life became busy and fulfilling again. The magic language wasn't hard to learn, and Dake's learning process was quite smooth. When his peers were playing chess, going shopping, having fun, and going on adventures, he was constantly absorbing knowledge. When learning something, if it was effective and there was obvious improvement, it was actually very easy to get addicted to it. When you could derive pleasure from learning, there was no difference between learning and playing. That night, good news finally came out of the castle. The 7 couples whose emotions and memories were absorbed by the moon goddess had finally fully recovered under Sister Ka Lien's careful treatment. After the 7 couples walked out of the infirmary and learned that their relationship with their lover had been indirectly approved by the goddess, they were all moved and their feelings for each other naturally deepened. Originally, when students fell in love, they paid more attention to the present and didn't think about the future, so it was very difficult for them to reach the end. Even if they really liked each other at first, it was easy for them to doubt themselves and the other party for various reasons. Their relationship gradually deteriorated and eventually led to a breakup. This encounter was like a reassuring pill to them. Perhaps it could help them reach the end of the road. Fortune and misfortune go together. Sister Ka Lien leaned against the door and offered her blessings as an adult to this beautiful love. Chapter 136. The first Monday of November. Professor Shi Erfu finally returned from her trip. She briefly mentioned the progress of the incident in class, and then severely criticized the students for their enthusiasm for exploring the maze. She also said that she would put the golems into the secret passage and increase the intensity of the night patrols. Every person who was caught wandering the secret passage at night would have a large number of credits deducted. If they were caught after the curfew, then they would be locked up. In addition, Professor Lili would no longer send the guide fairy to pick people up. Those who got lost in the secret passage would have to bear full responsibility. In other words, as long as you don't go to the secret passage at night, or you don't get caught by the golems and you don't get lost, it's completely okay? Dake felt that he had correctly understood Professor Shi Erfu's meaning. The fact that the school didn't directly block the entrance to the secret passage was actually a statement. Remember the URL. But can't you? 6. They didn't oppose the students from entering the secret passage, but they deliberately reduced the number of people who entered the secret passage. This actually didn't affect most people that much. After all, most people didn't find anything in the secret passage, so it was fine if they didn't go. After so many days, the enthusiasm that was supposed to be consumed was almost exhausted. Only a small number of students with a strong purpose were estimated to be playing hide-and-seek with the golems in the secret passage. In any case, White and Luobo were frowning from beginning to end. After Professor Shi Erfu gave out more than twice the usual amount of homework, the summoning class was announced to be over. The first-year students finally ushered in the long-awaited magic guide class. They temporarily put aside their complaints about the doubled amount of homework, brought large and small bags of materials, and waited in the magic guide classroom early. Professor Ka Zaire entered the classroom at the right time and humorously said to the audience, "It seems that everyone has quite a lot of credits to spare. Each one of you brought more materials than the other? Not to mention other things, it really was a lot. After all, the materials for a magic bullet spell were around 100 credits, so it was normal to bring 2 more in case of failure. Most students didn't bite off more than they could chew. Their credits didn't allow them to bite off more than they could chew. In short, it was a relatively rational choice to start learning from magic bullet incantation first. After mastering the branding method of the magic incantation, he would try to learn the more difficult and expensive push incantation and obstacle incantation. In order to guarantee that at least one card-making task could be completed in class, it would be safer to bring along 2 or 3 sets of materials. For example, Deanna and Luo C brought 5 sets of materials for the magic bullet incantation, and 3 sets of materials for the push incantation, which cost a total of 1,100 credits. To them, this was a huge expenditure. On the other hand, AI Ma, who had a large amount of credits, prepared 3 sets of materials for the magic bullet spell, 2 sets of materials for the push spell, and 1 set of materials for the obstruction spell. Of course, there were also upstarts like White who bought 2 sets of materials for the flash spell. But Luo Boat beside him was relatively poor, only buying 2 sets of materials for the magic bullet incantation, and 1 set of materials for the push incantation. In any case, it looked like White was determined to make the flash spell. Professor Ka Zaire only glanced over, and he was well aware of what each student was thinking. He had a lot of teaching experience, and he almost immediately had a premonition of how some students would end up. But sometimes paying a price to buy a lesson was the privilege of young people. It wasn't like the older people, who were gradually losing that privilege. Professor Kazayer's face flashed with a trace of loneliness, and then he recovered his smile and said loudly, "Okay, as you all think, we will learn the orthodox method of making the magic card, the magic spell card." "Professor, hurry up. My materials are already unbearably thirsty." "Shoot him, magic bullet incantation." Well, there were already people who were imagining themselves using the magic bullet card. As a teacher, he naturally wanted to be able to see the most enthusiastic side of the students in his class. Professor Kazayer didn't say anything else, and he quickly went straight to the card printing section. He explained in detail how to imprint the magic spell on the blank magic card while writing on the blackboard. There was a schwa schwa sound under the podium. The students didn't need to be supervised at all. After about half an hour, the entire blackboard was filled with dense words. But this was still not enough. There were too many details to pay attention to in the imprinting of the magic spell. 1 or 2 classes wouldn't be enough. The students needed to practice on their own, and then ask questions according to the questions, and the professor would answer them one by one during class time. For this kind of experiment, if the professor didn't lead the way, it would be impossible to understand just by reading. But in short, it was finally time to start making the magic spell. Almost all the students started with the magic bullet incantation. Because this was the most basic and simplest magic spell card, it was a must-have card for beginners to master the basics. On this point, even Dake was no exception. He was very clear about the importance of mastering the basics. No matter how tall a building was, the foundation needed to be laid first. In the whole classroom, only White was trying to overcome the flicker incantation. Maybe this was what it meant to be a hero. The process of making a magic spell card was actually quite similar to the process of making a magic potion card. One of the core of both was the refinement of the ink. The ink of a magic potion card was the corresponding magic potion, while a magic spell card had to be configured with different inks according to each magic spell. Dake's experience in this field was far better than the other students, and he used 5 minutes to configure the corresponding ink. It was a liquid that was close to the cola in nature. In the Magic Guide class, it was called expansion water. Expansion water was made with expansion grass as the main body. As long as magic was injected, this expansion water would rapidly expand and then spray out of the container. It would feel like a cola eruption. During the process of making, a little mage would occasionally inject too much magic, and this would trigger this mechanism, causing the expansion water to spray out of the cup and splash all over the face. Boom! Deanna's expansion water sprayed out. She looked like a drowned rat. Dake slightly pursed his lips and didn't laugh out loud. Luosi quickly took out a prepared towel and helped her wipe it clean. The students in the front row wanted to turn around and laugh, but they also sprayed out their own expansion water. As the expansion water sprayed up into the air, the classroom was gradually filled with a cheerful atmosphere. If one person failed, they would be laughed at. If 2 people failed, they would be laughed at by more people. If 10 or 20 people failed, no one would laugh. Dake flipped open the magic bullet spell that he had extracted and had already started to brand the spell. Professor Kazayer unknowingly came up behind him. In addition to the mixing of the ink, the most important thing to pay attention to was the amount and frequency of magic required for every stroke of the magic pen when writing the Magic Guide language. It had to be precise and stable enough. This was really too difficult for little mages who had just awakened their magic. The higher the level of a magic spell card, the higher the requirements in this aspect. In the process of making a magic spell card for the first time, more than 80% of the little mages failed. It was Dake's first time copying a magic spell according to the standard method. In order to be proficient as soon as possible, he specially prepared a large number of 10-credit Magic Guide cards. He first tried about 5 or 6 times before he started to write on the Magic Guide card that had already been processed. There were many ways to write a magic spell. Magic Bullet Spell was a standard 9-square grid. It only needed 9 characters to form a magic spell. However, the composition of these 9 characters was not easy. Dake was fully focused and spent a full 10 minutes to completely copy this magic spell that only had 9 characters. Only when he successfully completed it, Professor Kazair nodded slightly and turned to look at the other students. The little mages still underestimated the production of Magic Bullet spell. They always thought that it was just copying, and that everyone could do it. However, they didn't expect that one would fail faster than the other. According to the failure rate of some people, not to mention 3 sets of materials, even 30 sets of materials would not be enough to waste. Fortunately, after the first failure, most people learned their lesson and used blank paper to practice copying the Magic Bullet spell. Although the effect of practicing on paper was not as good as practicing on blank magic guide cards, it could at least increase a bit of proficiency. The final step of making the magic spell card required the use of the number 5 refining array called the Demeter refining array. Demeter was one of the first developers of the magic guide language. He compiled the 63 magic runes that formed the foundation of the magic guide language. After Dake successfully drew the number 5 refining array, he put in the core material of the Magic Bullet spell, and the entire refining process was completed. After waiting for about 2 minutes, the magic spell card was finally refined successfully. Dake then used the same steps to create the second Magic Bullet spell. This time, the refining speed was significantly faster, and his proficiency increased further. After that, Dake did not care about the progress of the other students at all, and directly started the refining of the push spell. The push spell was indeed 1 level more difficult than the Magic Bullet spell. Although he was careful enough, he still failed once. Of course, he was not discouraged and directly continued the refining of the second card. In the middle of the refining, the bell rang. However, Dake was not affected and continued. In the classroom, most of the students were the same. This was quite unbelievable for the little sorcerers who wanted to rush out when they heard the bell. However, the refining experiment of the magic card had a charm that could capture people's hearts. Time continued to pass. Professor Kazair also did not leave the classroom. Under his careful guidance, there were students who completed the Magic Bullet spell, one after another. These students felt a great sense of accomplishment and smiled at the same time. Some of them left the classroom while some continued to stay in the classroom to observe. In the Knights Institute and the Aristocrats Institute, there were 3 points that attracted the most attention. Dake, Aima, and White, the 3 of them sat at 3 points in the classroom and were still focused. Aima's progress was not much slower than Dake's. She had 3 sets of materials for the Magic Bullet spell. She failed 1 and succeeded 2. Now she had also begun to study the refining of the push spell. White Gouda was still studying the refining of the first flicker spell. He seemed to be under a lot of pressure. His brows were tightly knitted. He had to think for a long time before he continued. If he could not figure it out, he would make a mistake, which made his progress extremely slow. The materials for the flicker spell in front of him were worth 1,000 credits. Even if he won second place in the year in the masquerade, he could only afford 3 sets of materials for the flicker spell. As a result, the pressure during the production process was increased to the maximum. The nervous mood even affected Luoboat, who was next to him. Luoboat stared at him intently. His toes were clenched tightly. As for Luoboat himself, he had successfully wasted 2 sets of materials for the Magic Bullet spell, and 1 set of materials for the push spell. 28 minutes after the bell rang, Dake finally completed the refining of the second push spell. This time he learned from the failure of the first set, and did not make the same mistake again. As expected, he succeeded. In this way, there are 2 Magic Bullet spells and 1 push spell. The next experiment should continue in the afternoon. While White seems to be refining the flicker spell, I should take this opportunity to observe. Maybe I can gain some experience? Dake packed up the materials while turning his head to look at White on the other side of the classroom. But his luck did not seem to be good. Just as he was about to observe, something went wrong with White's refining process. He did not know if it was due to excessive magical power input or something else, but the magic card that was still in the refining process suddenly exploded. Boom! Werther abruptly jumped back, displaying extremely fast reflexes. Although he fell to the ground because of the chair behind him, he managed to avoid the explosion. But Luobot, who was next to him, was not so lucky. The black smoke from the explosion of the magic card almost directly hit his face. He sat there in a daze, completely turned into charcoal. Professor Kazair hurriedly stepped forward and summoned the water element in an instant. It rolled up and wrapped Luobot in a bubble. "It's not a serious injury, just a little burnt hair." Professor Kazair sighed softly and let the water element wrap Luobot and walked out of the classroom. "I'll take him to the infirmary. Don't forget to clean up the classroom when you leave." This experiment accident happened quickly and was solved even faster. When the students came back to their senses, Professor Kazair had already taken Luobot away. White, who fell to the ground, was in a daze. "It's just an experiment accident." Aima only took a glance and continued his experiment. "It's just an experiment accident." Dake thought silently. He should be able to learn enough from this failure, right? It's just an experiment accident. Deanna pouted. "I can't even make an experiment accident happen. Dake, save me." Dake had no choice but to start teaching. While Deanna and Luosi benefited greatly, he also learned about the production of the magic bullet spell from another angle. So it's possible to make mistakes in these few points? Thus, he accumulated more knowledge. 4K/2-in-1. So far in August, monthly votes, rewards, blades, a total of 25 chapters had been added. There were still 6 days left. The end of August. There would be no more bounties in September. This month's final bounty would determine how much to add next month. In addition, the July bounty had 43 chapters. There were still 20 chapters left and 23 chapters left. There were still 6 days to think of a way to add more chapters. Finally, ask for a monthly vote. Row_. Chapter 137. Professor Thompson was in charge of the potionology class in the afternoon. However, it wasn't Professor Thompson's potionology class that left a deep impression on the students. It was Luobot who returned to class. Luobot, who was shaved bald by Sister Kalien, felt like he was lying naked on the snow with nowhere to hide. After the potionology class ended, the students lost the mood to laugh at Luobot, because the potionology homework was 3 times more than usual. In addition, they had to complete the production of magic spell cards before the next introduction to magic class. The first-year students found themselves completely deprived of their freedom. Because there was so much homework, even Dake was affected. He had to put down the production of magic spell cards and worked hard in the library until night time. Other than going to the lounge to draw a drop of bliss and storing it in the thinking bottle, he didn't do anything else. It wasn't until 8 o'clock in the evening that Dake said goodbye to Deanna and Luosi, who were still working hard, and returned to the dorm first. Remember in 1 second. https://m, VIP can't you? VIP. After that, he began to make the obstruction spell and fading spell. The production of the obstruction spell was very successful, which allowed him to obtain 2 obstruction spell magic spell cards. However, when he was making the fading spell, he encountered a problem and had to look up the textbook after the first one failed. Although the incantation of fading incantation was rarely used in duels, it was a magic card with a very high practical value. Using the fading spell could make a magister invisible for 0.5 seconds, and the invisible state lasted for 5 seconds. Although the duration wasn't long, it was one of the rare invisibility spells that could be mastered in the early stages. More importantly, this magic spell card could be used on others. However, Dake couldn't find a solution from the textbook. In the end, he practiced the dark spirit spell for half an hour and quickly fell asleep. The next day, in order to solve the problem of making the fading spell, Dake specially went to find Professor Kazair after the 2 classes in the morning. Professor Kazair was happy to help him solve the problem. After getting the answer, Dake successfully made the invisibility spell magic card by noon that day. As such, only the flicker incantation was left. The difficulty of flicker incantation was on a completely different level compared to the previous few magic spell cards. Dake wasn't confident that he could succeed in one try, so he decided to wait until he had learned the magic language, to a certain extent before attempting it. 2 magic bullet incantation, 1 push incantation, 2 obstruction incantation, and 1 fade incantation. 6 in total. Dake suddenly realized that he had a total of 18 magic cards. It seemed that in the blink of an eye, the 20 basic card sets were about to be assembled. He thought about it carefully for a while, and felt that he could try the duel club for the second half of next year's semester. After Halloween, it was very difficult for the first years to obtain a large number of credits. Joining the dueling club was a good way to obtain credits. However, that was something that needed to be considered in the second half of the semester. When it was about time, he tidied up a little, and went to the History of Magic classroom. There was only one History of Magic class on Tuesday afternoon. Unlike the dry and boring History of Magic class, the History of Magic class taught by Principal Earbook was very attractive, and the little mages were very much looking forward to it. Dake was also one of them. After all, there weren't many opportunities like this where they could listen to a story in peace. He even wanted to bring along some sunflower seeds and chocolate popcorn. He just didn't know if the principal of Earbook today was a real person. Actually, it wasn't that bad. After all, he couldn't tell if it was real or fake. Ring ring ring. When the bell rang, the students of the 4 academies all turned their eyes to the door. However, a faint light flashed on the podium, and Principal Earbook floated to the ground. She didn't seem to be affected by the disputes of the outside world at all, and still had a faint otherworldly aura. I'm very happy to be able to spend the second class with everyone. Today, we will continue to talk about the history of heroes. In the previous class, we talked about the role model of heroes, the story of the hero when he was still a student. We all know that there was another person in the kingdom who was as famous as the hero. Who can say her name? Principal Earbook quickly went into teaching mode. The students raised their hands one after another in the face of this free marks question. Principal Earbook looked around and finally pointed at Aima, who was in the middle of the first row. Aima's cheeks were slightly red, and she said excitedly, "It's one of the kingdom's twin swords, the goddess of war Yvette Saint Demung." When she said the word saint, she put a lot of emphasis on it. This was because the word saint symbolized the awakening of the divine bloodline. These people were also called saints, and they were the true powerhouses who stood at the peak of their era. The goddess of war was the same as Principal Earbook. They were both the representatives of the kingdom's women, and the most admired by independent women. Aima was naturally one of the goddess of war's fans. Matiska 5 points. Principal Earbook gestured for her to sit down, and then said softly, "Yvette is the most gentle child I've seen in my many years of teaching. I have many stories about her, but she's quite shy, and I'm afraid she wouldn't like me to publicize her story. So today, we're not going to talk about her, but about her and the hero's mutual friend, the magus Peter. Peter Shelvick, a hero who was active on the battlefield as an archmagus. Although his name wasn't as famous as the hero and the goddess of war, he was still a household name. But few people knew that Peter wasn't a pure human. He was a hybrid between a human and a fairy. He had slightly longer ears than humans and blue hair that was as clear as the sky. When the hero Brett and the goddess of war Yvette were studying in Shungmalian, they were both noble pure-blooded members of the House of Nobles. But Peter was a commoner, and was assigned to the House of Fools. How could a student of the House of Fools become friends with 2 students of the House of Nobles? This also involved another girl from the Sorcerer's Institute. But Principal Earbook obviously wasn't going to talk about stories that really involved people's privacy. She always had a good sense of propriety, and she only talked about stories that the main character wouldn't care if they were leaked or not. Peter Shelvick was a person who was very similar to Zhong-yi of the House of Fools. His wisdom was hidden deep within, and his heart was pure and naive. He had the greatest possibility. As a hybrid of fairies, he didn't have the natural mischievous and active nature of fairies. He was a quiet person who was different from those of his age. He was the best unpolished jade, and should have been polished by time to become more outstanding than Brett and Yvette. But he didn't wait until then. Piotr Shelvick had died on the battlefield. Chapter 138. Eardiai's headmaster spoke tirelessly. Although he was telling the story of a hero when he was still a student, there was a trace of tragedy in between the lines. The little mages had never experienced the bloody war between the humans and the demons. They were born in the evening and grew up in the dawn. They had crossed an entire century, and could only recall the sorrow and glory of that era through words and narratives. Pyotr Sherwich was a gentle and pure man. When he was in his second year, he received permission from the headmaster of the Fool's Yard to establish a small magical zoology society. In the society's classroom, he raised a few magical animals that were forbidden by the academy. From then on, he was given the nickname Breeder. Eardiai's story stopped there. The students who walked out of the classroom didn't take away too much sadness with them. Instead, they walked with light steps. After all, Eardiai's headmaster didn't give them any homework. The website was https://m. But can't you? VIP around 4 o'clock. Dake had already returned to his dorm. Even if he didn't count his homework, his schedule had been very tight recently. The treasure map had been set aside, and he couldn't squeeze out any time to eat melons. And this afternoon was the time for the fruit of bliss to bloom and bear fruit. After storing up on Sunday and Monday, there were already 2 drops of bliss in the insect tree, which totaled 3 points. With the 1 drop today, he had 5 points. He first fed the cat grass some cat juice, then brought the milkweed to the balcony. He pulled open the protective fence of the insect tree, and let the milkweed absorb the 3 points of bliss stored in the tree. The milkweed was very obedient. It could lie on the soft cotton mat and bask in the sun all day long. Dark also built a warm hut on the other side of the balcony for it to sleep in at night. When the 3 points of bliss were absorbed, the flower of bliss on the milkweed's head had already bloomed. It was a pink flower with a hint of green. 1 more point. Dake used the magic brain dropper to suck out today's bliss. After a while, he then fed the milkweed with 2/3 of the drops. Moo moo moo. The milkweed quickly absorbed the 1 point of bliss. It licked the corner of its mouth and turned its head to nibble on Dake's finger. The flower of bliss on its head also began to bear fruit. The charming petals withered at a speed visible to the naked eye. The lower part of the flower's ovary quickly expanded, and the ovule quickly developed into a fruit that was slightly bigger than the fruit of pride. A pink fruit with green veins and a naturally formed emblem of bliss. It was a fruit of bliss that was emitting a rotten smell. Just like the kitty grass, the milkweed also had a thin stem on its head. Dake held the fruit of bliss. Then he began considering another matter. When he was making the Diru beast, he directly used the fruit of pride as the core material. In fact, he didn't make full use of it. A fruit. The fruit of bliss. Bliss, a bliss 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 blah of bliss blitch. The problem now is that we don't have a control group. We can't prove whether Kettle's juice extraction ability is effective on the fruit of great sin. It really depends on luck. But this time, I don't have too many concerns. After some thought, Dake summoned Kettlepot and placed the fruit of bliss into one of the holes. He then patted its head and said, "Please." Huhu responded and immediately retreated back into its shell. It began to dissolve and ferment the fruit. Since they had already reached this point, there was no point in worrying anymore. Dake waited patiently. They waited for nearly half an hour. Half an hour later, a cup of fruit of bliss juice appeared on the lab table. "Little devil. Forget it, I won't try this time. After all, I'm not a demon god." The fruit juice of the fruit of bliss was already very effective. Every drop he drank was 1 drop less, so it was better not to waste it. Dake calmed himself down and immediately moved on to the next step of the experiment. This time, the refining method is bird and beast species common. The core material is the milk of the fruit of bliss and the milkweed. The target of the refining is the milk jar. Different from the time when he used the fruit of pride to refine the Diru beast, there wasn't much preparation for this experiment. Even the refining method was chosen based on the attributes of the milk pot. This was to guide the results of the experiment to the milk jar. However, because there was no prior experiment, he wasn't sure if the basic refining method of bird and beast species common would work. However, the error tolerance of the common, refining method was actually quite high. Through this refining method, there was a probability of refining all the other attributes. In short, this experiment was full of uncertainty. However, it was precisely because of uncertainty that there was a surprise. The refining of every magic elf card was originally filled with random factors. The so-called refining method only limited this randomness to a certain extent. In short, before the experiment, Dake was already mentally prepared for the experiment to fail. The entire experiment process was quite smooth. After Dake activated the number 1 refining array, he slowly poured in the juice of the fruit of bliss. The light of the number 1 refining array flickered, as if the analysis of the fruit of bliss had encountered an obstacle. However, the circle of light eventually stabilized. Dake then poured in the milk of the milkweed as an ingredient, and the circle of light gradually lit up. Seeing that the materials didn't seem to be enough, Dake simply took out the other material related to the cow in his hands. When the thick and long Minotaurus hair was stuffed in, the light of the refining array suddenly burst out. When the light converged and the cocoon was woven, the experiment unexpectedly ushered in a success. Dake reached out and pressed on the light cocoon, pouring his desire for the milk jar into the light cocoon along with his magic power. The magic power in the light cocoon constantly fluctuated, and all kinds of materials continued to be smelted. It took about 5 minutes before it stabilized. Seeing that the light cocoon didn't explode midway, Dake was slightly relieved. He took out a mercury knife and carefully cut open the light cocoon. In the process of cutting open, milky white light continuously flowed out of the cocoon. When the entire cocoon was cut in half, the light cocoon suddenly turned into a viscous milk liquid. Dake calmed himself down, put down the mercury knife, and took out a pair of tweezers to pick up the magic card from the milk. As the milk slid down, the magic elf on the surface of the card was revealed, and it was the long-awaited milk jar. Dake was delighted and hurriedly rinsed the magic card clean. The edge of the magic card emitted a faint golden halo. It was actually a gold card. Card name Milk Jar. Type, Elf card. Level, *******. Race, Bird Beast. Attribute, Normal Magic Power, 2000 Attack, 1000, Defense, 2000. Ultimate Skills, Herbivore Milk Drink, Round Roll. Chapter 139. 2000 points of magic power and defense, both at the top of the 4-star level. This big Milkkin was a magic elf card with full defense. Unlike Kettle, which was too small, Milkkin was 1.2 meters tall. It was more than enough to protect a magic ball. What was even more frightening was that, just like Kettle, it was a gold card with 4 sure-kill skills. Gold cards were known as God's cards in the past, and they represented bugs. The 4 sure-kill skills of Milkkin were also very practical, and they were not any weaker than Kettle. Dake immediately injected magic power to check the details of these 4 skills. Herbivore, passive skill. When attacked by grass attribute sure-kill skills, not only will you not be damaged, but your attack power will also increase. Milk drink. Drink milk and recover half of your maximum magic power. Round. Curl your body into a round shape to increase your defense. After using this sure-kill skill, the rolling power will be doubled. Roll. Roll to attack the opponent. Every hit will double the power. The maximum number of attacks is 5. If interrupted, the coefficient will be reset. Remember the URL. MVIP can't you? 6-inch hiss. Isn't this a little too crazy? Even though he had some impression of these skills, Dake still couldn't help but sigh at how crazy they were after seeing them for himself. Herbivore was originally a hidden ability of Milkkin. With Herbivore, Milkkin was completely immune to grass attribute skills. It was the ultimate nemesis of grass attribute magic elves. Milk Drink was even more crazy. It was a completely strengthened version of Moon Ivan's Moonlight skill. Because Milkkin had 2000 points of magic power, it was especially powerful. And unlike Moonlight, Milk Drink could be given to others. As for the rounding plus rolling combo skill, Dake silently chanted the usual summoning spell, and after spending a full minute, he finally summoned Milkkin. Moo Heartsuit. Milken looked like a pink cow, with a black ball at the end of its tail. It was very cute. It was the first time it came to this world. It opened its eyes in a daze, and its eyes were full of confusion. But when it saw Dake, its eyes suddenly lit up. It mooed and pounced toward Dake. Dake was only stunned for a moment, before he was pushed to the ground by the milk can. Although the milk jug was only 1.2 meters tall, it weighed 150 kilograms. Dake immediately felt the unbearable weight of his life. He smiled helplessly. I almost forgot that this is Paradise's creation. After pushing the milk can away, Dake began to test out his skills. Let's start with milk. The milk jug finally rubbed against Dake's palm and reluctantly retreated. Then it stood up like a human, rubbed its hands together, and a milk bottle appeared out of thin air. This scene was slightly different from what Dake had imagined, but it didn't stop him from taking the milk bottle from Big Milk can and tasting it. It was very ordinary and tasty, but it couldn't compare to the milk that had been fermented through kettle. But after drinking a little, Dake suddenly felt as if his whole body was filled with air, and he was full of energy. Obviously, this was similar to the milk from the cow grass. It was just that the milk from Big Milk can was much more effective than the milk from the cow grass. The disadvantage was that the milk from Big Milk can belong to the magic elf skill, and it produced the effect of the skill. It didn't really drink a bottle of milk, so it didn't have any nutritional value. So if you really wanted to train your body, you still had to drink the milk from the cow grass. But at least it proves that Big Milk can be given to others. Next is rounding. Under Dake's command, Big Milk curled its body into a ball. A layer of metallic luster appeared on the surface of its skin, and there was a very obvious feeling of its defense increasing. As for the effect of the defense increase, one only needed to take a look at the magic card to know. Dake injected his magic power to check and was instantly stunned. The defense increased from 2,000 to 3,000 points. The jump was huge, far beyond Dake's expectations. So, rounding was such a godly skill? In his shock, Dake looked at the last killing move, rolling. Rolling's basic power wasn't high, but as long as it hit continuously, the power would increase. It was a classic snowball skill. In the case of all 5 attacks hitting, the power would increase by 16 times. With rounding, as a prerequisite, it would increase by 32 times. If Big Milk Can's rolling skill hadn't been weakened, the last attack would be even more terrifying. It could be called rolling hell. Dake didn't experiment with rolling in the dormitory. In fact, the 4 types of magic spell cards that had been successfully created hadn't been tested. He needed a spacious place to practice those magic spells. Unfortunately, the dual practice room on the 8th floor of the dormitory was usually occupied by the seniors. Maybe the secret passage is a good place? Well, if I'm brave enough, those magic statues that were thrown into the secret passage are natural practice targets. In short, that night, Dake brought the card pack to a corner of the castle. Of course, he wasn't stupid enough to go to the secret passage to find the magic statues. The castle was so big that it wasn't difficult to find a corner with no one around. Dake not only summoned Big Milk Can to experiment with rolling, he also tried out the 4 magic spell cards several times. Magic Bullet spell was the simplest to use. As long as magic power was injected and a summoning spell was cast, a magic bullet the size of a fist could be shot out. The base power of a magic bullet was 100 points. It was equivalent to Illusory Beast, Ibu's full power punch. Although the power was limited, because of the low magic consumption and short cooldown, it was a commonly used magic spell to fill in the gaps in a battle. Push spell, as the name suggested, could give an object a push. Because the casting distance was very short, it was usually used to push oneself forward by 1 to 3 meters in a certain direction in an instant. As for obstruction spell, it could create a brick of air no larger than 1 cubic meter in a certain area. Fate spell didn't need to be described too much. Depending on how they were used, the effects of these curses varied greatly. If enough magic power was injected, and the time was long enough, the effect of the magic spell could be strengthened. How to use them skillfully had always been a very big problem. Although these magic spell cards all had high-level magic spells derived from them, they still couldn't completely replace them. The success of Big Milk Can's creation was very significant to Dake. This meant that he had developed a magic fairy creation system that was most suitable for him. With this method, he could even create most of the Digibeasts and Pokémon. Unfortunately, the core of the system, the species of catgrass, and the number of sins limited his research. This forced him to temporarily stop after the creation of the Big Milk Can. According to his calculations, in the next 3 days he could draw a total of 5 points of bliss, and with the remaining 5 points, he had a total of 5 points. He was going to store these 5 points of bliss, for the time being, and when he had enough he would do a big one. However, on the second day he suddenly found that bliss wasn't enough. Chapter 140. On Wednesday evening, Dake sat in his seat in the library, deep in thought. Since the beginning of the month, he had drawn a total of 8 major sins. He had drawn pride 2 times, a total of 3 points. He had drawn bliss 6 times, a total of 9 points. For the past week, Dake had been too busy with his homework and experiments to care about anything else. Bliss had not increased at all. Bliss originally only had 110 points. After drawing 9 points, he was left with 101 points. Out of these 101 points, only 1 point could be drawn using the dragonfly skimming the surface of the water method. Unless he took the risk and inserted the magic brain dropper into his brain. Otherwise, he would have to stop there. Or perhaps he could artificially increase bliss? Remember, https://mvip VIP. According to my calculations, I have a total of 8 major sins. I can draw 1 more in the next 2 days, a total of 3 points. I need to increase bliss to 104 points to meet my needs. Or I can give up on bliss and start with pride. Pride has 102 points left. I can only draw 1 more. I should think of a way to increase bliss. Bliss has the flower card as a backup. Even if it overflows a little, it is the safest choice. Also, bliss's growth path is very obvious. There are many ways to increase it. Let's do it. After making his decision, Dake raised his head and looked at Deanna, who was sitting in front of him. A faint light flashed in his eyes. There was a lot of homework for Tuesday's arithmetic class. Seeing that the first class on Thursday was the time to hand in their homework, many first-year students who had not finished their arithmetic homework came to the library to do it. Deanna and Luosi were among them. Every time they came to the library, they would sit opposite Dake. It was as if that had become their exclusive seat. Dake always taught them to use their brains and think more, and to solve problems with their own abilities. Therefore, the two of them frowned and thought hard. They did not ask Dake whenever they encountered a problem. This was a good sign. Even though Diana wasn't that smart, the first-grade arithmetic class wasn't that difficult. If he worked hard, he could lay a good foundation. This would be of great help to them in their second-year studies. That was because arithmetic was the foundation of everything. Whether it was summoning, potioneering, magic introduction, or even duels and the compilation of magic languages, they all involved arithmetic. Many students had no choice but to take endless remedial classes after they were promoted to level 2. This was because their foundations were too weak and could not support them to continue learning. Dake didn't want to see his only 2 friends in the same grade fall into the abyss of tutoring. But after interacting with them for a long time as a teacher, not everything was good. Dake could not help but squint his eyes. It had been a long time since he had paid close attention to Deanna and Luosi. Deanna had silver hair. In the kingdom, silver and blonde hair were symbols of nobility. Deanna's mother was a close relative of the royal family, so she had some royal blood in her. That was why she inherited her mother's silver hair, which was slightly different from the iconic brown hair of the Great Bell family. Luosi had blonde hair, but it was an extremely faint, slightly translucent, pale gold. Her Flotty family was originally a big noble family, but gradually declined during the war. Now only her uncle's family was left. Unlike Deanna, who had a round face, Luosi already had the charm of a beauty. Her face shape was changing into an oval face, and her temperament was more delicate and pitiful. People could not help but want to cherish her. Dake had not paid much attention to her all this time. Only now did he suddenly realize that he had such a potential girl by his side. But he carefully observed Luo Si until her face turned red, but he still did not feel the awakening of the primitive power. This won't do. Dake had no choice but to look at Deanna. Deanna's round, pink face always made him want to reach out and pinch it. He still had this impulse. But for some reason, the primitive power was as still as a lake. It seemed that Deanna was not that hot. Tired. Is this the growth of one's temperament? Dake pondered the reason. Simple visual contact is not enough to make my heart fluctuate too much? Dake tidied up a little and took out the self-study notes on magic language from his bag. He flipped through it and stood up. Deanna curiously asked, "Dake, where are you going?" Dake waved the notebook in his hand and said, "To find someone to ask me some questions." Deanna said, "Oh." At the front desk of the library, Panduola Doragon was reading and writing. She had a good memory. Basically, she could read 10 lines at a glance. The notebook was densely packed with important points. Recently, she suddenly had a lot of homework, which made her feel a little troubled. She had no choice but to finish her homework in between work. This was supposed to be a leisure time. After finishing her homework, she put down her pen and picked up a book called Dragon's Secret Ritual to continue reading. Even in the Shung Malian library, Dragon's Secret Ritual was in the list of forbidden books. But she had obtained permission from the professor to read this part of the forbidden book. Once she used the knowledge in this book, she would be able to summon the dragon seed more easily. Senior, register. Panduola looked up at White and Luoboat, who came to the counter and handed over the entry and exit register. The hero's son was very famous, especially after the meeting last Wednesday afternoon. People who did not pay much attention to him were forced to recognize him again. "Did your homework increase?" Panduola asked casually. The hero's son, who did not usually appear in the library, came every day. People could not help but think that it was due to the pressure of homework. But when she asked casually, White suddenly became nervous. This was the first time Panduola took the initiative to talk to him. When Luoboat touched his arm, he scratched his head and said, "Yes, it increased. I don't know what's wrong with the professors. The pressure of studying is already very heavy." Panduola nodded slightly. "It seems that this is not a phenomenon of the same grade." Then she took back the entry and exit register and continued reading. White opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but suddenly saw a familiar person walking out. Dake did not expect to meet the heroes duo here, but it did not affect him. White did not know why, but Luoboat's expression was not right. Dake hesitated for a moment, then nodded to the two of them as a sign of politeness. Then he walked into the counter very naturally and moved a stool to sit next to Senior Sister. He asked, "Senior Sister, do you have time?" Chapter 141. Of course. Pandora raised her head in surprise. Her slender fingers lifted the hair on her forehead and combed it behind her ear. Her skin was too fair, which made her lips rosy. The heart-shaped scales under her eyes reflected a faint silver light under the light. She had an almost bewitching charm. Dake subconsciously shrank back until he saw the corners of her mouth curl up. He suddenly came to his senses. He couldn't help but smile and lay the notebook flat. The fragrance floating around him teased the youth's mind. Dake picked up the pen and said, "I have some questions that I don't understand and want to ask you." He really wanted to ask for advice. Although the introductory knowledge of the magic language wasn't particularly difficult, he had no foundation and had to learn it by himself. It was inevitable that he would encounter problems that he couldn't solve on his own. In the process of learning, he made a list of the problems. He was going to ask Professor Kazair once he accumulated more. First website. https://m, but can't you? VIP, but now. He was just asking Senior Sister for advice. Panduola wasn't disappointed. She already knew that this junior brother didn't come to her without a reason. It would be strange if he didn't have a purpose. If it was just a learning problem, she would be happy to help. But in the process, she would naturally collect some interest. Don't, there's an outsider here. It's okay, relax. Slow down. It's coming. Okay. Panduola taught Dake step by step how to inject magic power more accurately and effectively when writing the magic language. Dake tried to restrain his impulses and calmly learned and memorized as much as possible. But Bliss still kept popping up. White stood in front of the counter for a long time. In the end, she led Luo Boat into the library. The two stopped at a corner. White couldn't help but ask, when did they become so close? Luo Boat comforted her. She's just asking for advice. Dake often goes in and out of the library. It's normal for him to know senior sister. White gritted her teeth. If I ask for advice, will senior sister teach me? Luo Boat, huh? But we don't know her well. White, huh? Luo Boat. Maybe we can check the favorability first? That would be a good reference. White was already holding Taboo Love, but she shook her head and said, no need, it shouldn't be too high. We are indeed only strangers whose names we know. Luo Boat, do I have to be like Dake and read more books to have a chance? Luo Boat. I don't know. However, having more common topics was a magic weapon for communicating with girls. Senior Panduola clearly likes to read. But he shrugged again. But we have to catch up on our homework tonight. Maybe we can start tomorrow? White hesitated. But I still need to find the treasure left by my father in the secret passage. Luo Boat. Then there's nothing we can do. Isn't there a saying that you can't have a fish and a bear's paw at the same time? White. Even so, what you said makes sense. Senior Panduola really likes to read, especially books about dragons. Maybe I can give her a book for Christmas. Luo Boat. Good idea. I recommend Alibaba's 14 Ways to Slay a Dragon. It's said to be a super bestseller. White. Let's think about it later, there's still a long time before Christmas. Bliss +1. Looking at the long-awaited notification in his field of vision. Dake subconsciously put some distance between himself and Senior Panduola, but instead of increasing the distance between them, the distance between them decreased. The heavy pressure was almost pressing against his face. Panduola secretly smiled as she moved closer and closer to the edge of the cliff. Bliss +1 Dake's face was slightly red, and he was a little anxious. How immature. Panduola thought to herself, but she didn't stop teaching him. As a top student in the 4th year of the School of Magic, her deep knowledge of the magical language wasn't something Dake could compare to. Just a few words of advice were enough to benefit Dake a lot. An hour later, she whispered into his ear, by the way, isn't the magical language a second-year course? Why are you learning it so early? Dake hurriedly used the question and answer to distract himself. I need to make a magical card. Panduola. What magical card? Maybe I can help you. Dake. Curse Cage and Fusion. Panduola was surprised. That's not easy to make, especially fusion. Even though the requirements for the magical language aren't particularly high, there are a lot of things to pay attention to in the process of making it. I had to make it a few times before I succeeded. But you've only been in school for 3 months, and you can already use fusion? Dake. It's still in the experimental stage. Panduola was a little relieved. Based on your progress, maybe you can apply to join the dueling club next semester and compete with the second-year students. How about this? When you're ready to make fusion, you can ask me out. I'll help you keep an eye on it. As for the curse cage, as long as you're careful, it shouldn't be a problem. The curse cage. As long as I'm careful, it shouldn't be a problem? Dake's expression was a little stiff. After studying it for a while, he didn't think the curse cage was that easy to make. If he really started to work on it, perhaps the 1,500 credits worth of materials would be gone just like that. But if that was the case, didn't that mean that the fusion crafting was a lot more advanced than the curse cage? Magical crafting had always been a bottomless pit. Especially if you wanted to try to make a magical card that was beyond your ability, you might not necessarily get results no matter how much money you invested. Since Senior Panduola had taken the initiative to ask, Dake naturally wouldn't let go of the opportunity. He hurriedly said, Thank you, Senior. When I can compile the fusion spell, I'll ask Senior for help. But the senior changed the topic and said, "Of course I can help. But the ancient alchemist Edward once said that if you don't get something, you won't get anything. If people didn't sacrifice anything, they wouldn't get anything. In order to get something, they had to pay the same price." This was the principle of equivalent exchange in alchemy. Us magisters can be said to be the advancement of the alchemists. Naturally, we can't forget this principle. What do you think? Dake. Christmas gifts, I understand. Panduola suddenly smiled. And the Christmas ball. This feeling of clearly knowing, but restraining oneself and returning to etiquette, isn't too bad. Heartsuit Panduola watched Dake's back disappear into the library. Her gaze immediately turned and quickly returned to the sea of knowledge. Those who were proficient in time management could always quickly switch between two states. Back in the reading room, Dake looked at the problem he had roughly solved in his notebook and glanced at the bliss that had skyrocketed by 7 points. He couldn't help but fall into distress. Did it really overflow? Chapter 142. Once the floodgates of desire were opened, it was extremely difficult to restrain. Dake overestimated his ability to restrain himself. However, Panduola really hit his stride. Whether it was her temperament, image, or inner cultivation, all of them hit the bull's eye. The current bliss is 108 points. After absorbing 3 points, there will be 105 points left. Without wasting the flower cards, it seems that I have to restrain myself this month. Dake pondered for a while before he quickly changed his state and continued to immerse himself in learning the magical language. Panduola also talked about a lot of knowledge that he hadn't dabbled in before. He needed to spend more time memorizing and consolidating it. There was a huge difference between having someone lead the way and being alone in the dark. Dake only felt that today's harvest was particularly gratifying. However, after leaving the library at 9 o'clock in the evening, he had to start worrying about the Christmas ball and Christmas presents. He remembered the website, VIP Can't You? VIP. He originally thought that the invitation to the ball was a joke. However, it seemed that he couldn't avoid it now. There were also Christmas presents. In addition to preparing for Chin Yushan, he also had to prepare for Deanna and Luosi. In addition, he also had to prepare for Professor Li Li and Professor Ka Zaire. That would be a total of 5 sets. If it was just a small gift, it would be okay. If he put enough effort into it, it would be a huge expense. Dark, on the other hand, was actually very tight on money after spending last weekend. Considering that whether it was the Spell Cage card or the Fusion card, the price of the materials was actually beyond the range of what a first-year student could afford. If he really wanted to refine them, he needed to obtain more credits. Do I really have to set up a stall on Traveler's Street like a senior student to make money? Dake had to consider this possibility. However, he quickly gave up on this idea. In addition to the time required to set up a stall, it also required a lot of time to prepare the goods. For Dake, who already had a tight schedule, it was completely unacceptable. In addition, the goods he could choose were cheap fruit juices that had many substitutes. It was the type that was time-consuming and didn't make much money. In that case, I have to think of other ways. In the blink of an eye, it was Thursday afternoon. Headmaster Erdii went on to tell a story about Peter Shelvich in the history of magic. Then he turned his attention to another hero. That was the first member who applied to join the Magical Animals Society after Peter founded it. Her name was Claire Kate. Claire was a student in the same year as the Mage Institute. She had inherited the usual style of the Mage Academy. She liked to read and was very quiet. She had the same hobby as Peter. Later, Claire, who was active on the battlefield as a sage, was just an ordinary girl without any special skills. Because students were required to join at least one club from the 2nd grade onwards, Claire chose the Magical Zoology Club, which had few people. Then, this ordinary girl with no special skills suddenly began to grow at an uncontrollable speed. Her zoo series of cards was stunning for a while. Principal Erdii was also amazed when he talked about Miss Claire. That was the era of stars. There were countless Shungmalian heroes. Even so, Claire was one of the more stunning ones. Most of the stories about Claire's school days were related to animals. Peter could always get some magical animals from nowhere and put them in the club classroom, but he himself was not good at raising animals, so Claire was basically responsible for it. Every time those magical animals made a mess in the school, Claire helped to clean it up. The story developed one day. A cat in the magical zoology club suddenly disappeared. It was a white cat with white pupils. If it was placed in a white room, it would be ignored if it was not careful. In order to find the white cat, Peter and Claire tried their best to release a cat search notice. However, after 2 weeks of searching, there was still no trace of the white cat. It wasn't until 2 weeks later at dusk, Claire found a little girl quietly walking the cat in the back garden of the castle, that she suddenly realized why she couldn't find it. Because that cat had changed its color. The cat that changed from a white cat to a black cat was picked up and brought back to the dormitory. Because the school prohibited private animals, the person who picked up the cat had been secretly hiding it in the dormitory, so it had not been discovered. And because the cat changed from white to black, the cat search notice lost its meaning. Claire found the little girl who picked up the cat and explained the matter to her. Although the other party was reluctant, she still returned the cat to her. But from then on, the little girl would go to the magical zoology club almost every day to see the cat. Later, she directly joined the magical zoology club and became the third member. When Principal Erdii said this, there was a trace of reminiscence. Can anyone guess who she is? This was clearly a freebie question. Many students of the Mage Institute raised their hands. Dake leaned on the back of the chair, but recalled the lazy cat at home. The cat named Galileo could not only change its color according to the stars and weather, but it could also actively assimilate with the environment. In order to not be taken out for a walk, it always hid itself in the background. When Dake was very young, he especially liked to play hide and seek with it. That would really be a game of hide and seek. A student of the Mage Institute stood up and logically reasoned, "That's right. I remember the principal mentioned in the last class that the reason why Grand Magus Peter could become friends with the hero and the Valkyrie was because of the existence of a certain woman. And in the last class, it was also mentioned that the Valkyrie was a person who liked cats very much. The principal obviously wouldn't mention something unimportant. Then the answer is obvious. Sage Claire is the link that connected Grand Magus Peter and the Valkyrie. And the one who picked up the cat was of course the Valkyrie herself. Principal Erdii clapped her hands in satisfaction. Very correct, bonus 5 points. Then she briefly talked about the relationship between Claire and Alvette. Then she smiled and said, "Claire is a very easy person to get along with, and she is very knowledgeable, gentle, and responsible. I think you will all like her." Her words seemed to contain some hidden meaning. Dake's face paled and slowly raised his hand. Principal Erdii looked at him and said, "Dimming, is there anything you want to ask?" Dake held on to a chance and asked, "Principal, our new History of Magic professor, could it be Miss Claire Kate?" Chapter 143. You guessed right. The hero of the Dusk War, the Sage of the Beasts, Claire Kate, will be coming to St. Marianne next week. Dark nodded and said, "The hero of the Dusk War, Sage of the Beasts, Claire Kate, will be coming to St. Marianne next week." Following Principal Erdii's official announcement, the classroom instantly became noisy. Claire wasn't as famous as the hero or the Valkyrie, but since she had the title of Sage, she must have some fame. Not to mention, there was a portrait of the Sage of the Beasts hanging on the wall of honor of the Sorcerer School. The students of the Sorcerer School were naturally the most excited about this. The students of the Sorcerer School vied with each other as they looked forward to the hero of their school. On the other side, the students of the House of Fools were also interested. A girl from the House of Fools suddenly raised her hand and asked, "Excuse me, will Ms. Claire Kate be the Dean of the House of Fools?" For faculties, for deans. However, after Professor Didi's resignation, the position of Dean of the House of Fools had been vacant, and the students of the House of Fools had been without a leader. Remember this. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP. They naturally had more fantasies about the new professor. Principal Erdii said, "Claire will temporarily take over the position of History of Magic until the end of the semester. However, Whether she will continue to be the dean of the House of Fools or not will take some time to consider. Both of us. After hearing Principal Aerti's confirmation, Dake sat down dejectedly. Claire Kate was one of the Valkyrie's best friends when they were students, and they had kept in touch after the war. Or rather, she had temporarily lived in the Duke's mansion for a long time. This sage of the beasts was just as Principal Aerti said, gentle, quiet, knowledgeable, and a hero worthy of respect. Her only flaw was that she liked to turn people into animals. He closed his eyes and listened to the excited discussions of the students. He felt that these kids were really naive. When they were turned into cats and dogs because they angered Claire, or because they made Claire happy, they would probably know what it meant to be. Humans are not sages. In short, except for Dake, who didn't have a good impression of Claire, the rest of the students were very happy. After this lesson, the news that Sage of Beasts was going to be the temporary magic history professor spread like wildfire among the first years. It didn't take long for the entire academy to know about this. Some of the people who didn't pay much attention to heroes in the past also started to look up information. After all, Claire Kate was a true war hero. Who wouldn't like a hero to be their professor? That night, while Dark was doing his homework in the library, the curious Diana asked in a low voice, "Dark, do you know a new professor of the history of magic?" Dake nodded and said softly, "We've been together for a while." Diana was a little envious. What kind of person is Ms. Claire Kate? Would she tell stories about heroes like Headmaster Aerti? Would she assign a lot of homework? Does she like bears? Dake looked at Diana's pure and innocent eyes, and a trace of warmth flowed out of his heart. He then said, "How should I put it? She's a person like her name. I think Diana will definitely have something in common with her." Diana patted her chest and let out a sigh of relief. That's good. The students were looking forward to the new professor, but they were also a little worried. But as expected, the expectations were higher. Dake even heard that the first-year students from the School of Magic and the School of Fools were planning a surprise. But the good news was that Claire Kate would only work at the Shungmalian until the end of the semester. She was probably just a temporary replacement. The headmaster would most likely find a more suitable professor during this period of time. After returning to the dorm, Dake completed the last extraction of bliss. So far, there were a total of 5 bliss points stored in the insect tree, and 1 pride point. Dake had 2 ideas for the time being. One was to use the fruit of bliss to make 2 more magic elf cards next month. The other was to find a way to continue accumulating. After he had 20 bliss points, he would try to get the fruit of bliss. The former was a more reliable choice. The latter had higher expectations, but he wasn't sure if 20 bliss points were enough. But when the time came, he still had half a month to think about it. The next day was Friday. After the dual class in the morning, the students were looking forward to their trip to Traveler's Street again. There were no tasks related to Traveler's Street this week. The first-year students seemed to have not had fun in a long time. Plus, they had been suppressed by homework, so they were all very bored. At noon, it was 12 o'clock. Students poured into Traveler's Street in 2s and 3s. Dake didn't enter Traveler's Street until it was 1 o'clock. He went straight to the cat's flower shop. He first greeted the cats, and then asked the shop assistant, "Miss Cat, is there any progress in the development of the rabbit grass?" The shop assistant was very happy that someone had been thinking about her new product. "It's going well. If it's fast, it'll take half a month. If it's slow, it'll take 2 months. There should be results." "Dimming, do you think the rabbit grass will sell well?" Dake smiled. "It should. After all, the rabbits are so cute." Then he walked around the secret room, but he didn't buy any new cat grass. This weekend, Dake spent more time learning magic language. His progress wasn't slow. He was gradually getting started. Panduola's guidance was like opening a window for him. He could see the scene in the room more clearly, and it became easier for him to learn. And when he worked hard for it, White and Luo boat went deep into the secret passage again. They started their adventure to find the treasure. On the other side, AI Ma Metis's research on the mural had reached a critical point. On Sunday night, AI Ma found Dake and shared her research with him. Dake was somewhat embarrassed. After all, he didn't have time to study the mural, but AI Ma didn't complain. She flipped through a lot of literature, asked the seniors, and made a detailed deduction and analysis according to her own ideas. Finally, she had some results. Dake sat down and let AI Ma sit next to him. When AI Ma shared the results, the corners of her mouth couldn't help but curl up slightly. She opened her notebook and whispered, "If my analysis is correct, this set of murals should be from the super ancient era 4 eras ago. At that time, there were a lot of gods. They either lived in the sky or mixed in with the crowd." Chapter 144. Dake did not expect AI Ma to be able to find the origin of the mural in such a short time. She found a broken mark at the corner of the mural and restored it with the help of a senior. Based on the mark, she found the possible era of the mural. Thanks to the complete documents in the library, she was able to find the correct historical account based on the era. The mural was from the super ancient era 4 eras ago, and it recorded a complete story. AI Ma wrote down the story in her notebook. Dake took the notebook and looked at it carefully. He hesitated. The destruction of the Golden Nation? Yes. AI Ma pondered. In fact, before I found this mural, I was already looking for information about the Golden Nation. That's why I progressed so quickly. As she spoke, she took a book from the side and handed it over again. Dake took the book and looked at it carefully. It was a novel called The Golden King and the Secret Treasure. Dake knew that AI Ma sometimes read novels and biographies. The Golden King and the Secret Treasure was a book that she had been reading before Halloween. The first website was https://m. Vipcanchu. VIP. Is this the reason why the 8 murals appeared in the secret passage? Dake flipped through the book and suddenly understood. This novel was about a popular adventure story. The background of the novel was set in the era of a gold rush. Someone found sand mixed with gold in the desert. When the news spread, it attracted countless gold seekers. Joshua, the protagonist of The Slums, was one of them. Joshua's mother died of an illness because she did not have the money to buy medicine. Seeing his mother close her eyes forever in pain, Joshua developed a strong desire and obsession for money from then on. He stole, gambled, robbed, and gradually fell into the abyss. When the news of the golden sand came, Joshua joined the fanatical gold seekers without hesitation. The golden sand that emerged from the ground made countless people rich overnight. Slaves' wine manors. Everything that one could think of could be easily obtained. Joshua tirelessly traveled back and forth between the desert and the town, immersing himself in the revelry day and night. Until one day, the desert that was gushing out of the golden sand suddenly collapsed, and all the gold diggers fell into an ancient city. That city was the City of Gold, the last capital of the Gold Nation. And the king of the Golden Kingdom would forever sleep in the City of Golden. The surviving archaeologists identified the inscriptions on the site of the fall and told Joshua and the other gold diggers that the Golden King had buried endless treasures in his own mausoleum. That was the secret treasure. In order to find the secret treasure of the Golden King and become the new Golden King, Joshua and the gold diggers were swallowed by great greed and went deep into the city without any preparation. This was the beginning of the story. As for whether Joshua managed to successfully obtain the treasure, or was forever lost in the underground world, Dake did not see the end. He put down Golden King and the secret treasure and picked up AI Ma's notebook. What was written in the notebook was the story recorded in the mural, which was the fall of the Golden Kingdom. There were a total of 8 murals. In fact, he used a more abstract method to depict it. In the first painting, poor people in ragged clothes were digging out carts of ore from a mine. The ore inside was actually a gold mine. In the second painting, miners were mining in a mine. In the second painting, a half-naked blacksmith forged the ore into standard square bricks. In fact, he was casting gold bricks. In the third painting, a merchant in plain clothes sold basket after basket of square bricks to the nobles. In fact, they were not merchants or ordinary nobles. They were architects and ministers. The ministers collected the gold bricks, which implied that it was the king's order. In the fourth painting, nobles in luxurious clothes used square bricks to pile up a tower on an altar. Under the king's order, the ministers began to build the Golden Tower. The so-called altar represented that the Golden Tower was built for sacrifice. In other words, the entire Golden Tower was the sacrifice. In the fifth painting, thousands of humans prayed for the arrival of a certain existence under the altar. People prostrated themselves in front of the Golden Tower and began to sacrifice. In the sixth painting, a shining giant beast drilled out of a black hole in the sky during the sacrifice. The golden beast god responded to the human sacrifice and woke up from a deep sleep. In the seventh painting, a fierce and greedy giant beast roared and swallowed all the sacrifices and humans. Everything would become a sacrifice. In the eighth painting, human blood and corpses formed a strange pattern on the ground. Only death was eternal. The story itself was very simple. It was nothing more than the king of the time summoning a god for a certain purpose, but was swallowed by the god in the end. The so-called god was originally a respectful title created by humans for individuals who were far stronger than themselves. Whether it was a humanoid, intelligent god, or a ferocious and cruel god in beast form, they were all gods. In the super-ancient era, because of the preciousness and immortality of gold, humans linked it with eternity and created the equation gold equals eternity. The Golden King, who had infinite wealth, followed this equation. He built a tower of gold and offered it as a sacrifice in exchange for eternal life. But obviously he failed, and ultimately led to the destruction of the Golden Kingdom. AI Ma excitedly explained his own opinion. The Golden Kingdom had another name in historical records, which was the Eternal Kingdom. The so-called alchemy is refining gold, which is the pursuit of eternity, which is the pursuit of eternal life. The Golden King was called the earliest alchemist in many documents. He refined gold in order to find the way to eternal life, and the Golden Kingdom was just a byproduct of the research process. The Golden Kingdom was originally a kingdom built on desire, and it was ultimately destroyed by desire. The beast god depicted in the murals is not necessarily a real god. It could be the incarnation of desire. And the essence of the whole murals is this last painting. I suspect it is an alchemy array. The Golden King and the Secret Treasure, the destruction of the Golden Kingdom, the earliest ancient alchemist, the Golden King, and the last one, the suspected alchemy array pieced together by human blood and corpses. Day couldn't help but ponder. When he was copying the murals in the secret passage, he felt that the eighth painting was particularly strange, so he put in a lot of effort and painted it very carefully. But even so, to restore a complete alchemy array from a painting was still an extremely huge project. It could even be a project for an entire career in the academy. Chapter 145. Due to his shallow knowledge, Day couldn't give his own opinion on the study of murals. But AI Ma's research undoubtedly rekindled his interest in murals. But he couldn't put the cart before the horse. In the current situation, the study of the magic language was the most important thing, and the study of murals could be a topic of interest. When he mentioned this point, AI Ma said seriously, "Of course studies are the main thing, and research is just an interest. I won't lose sight of the other." Then she went back to her seat with a happy face. Dake looked at the book Golden King and the Secret Treasure, left by AI Ma, and felt a headache. He still had Merlin's biography, but he only read the beginning. He wanted to read more and more books, but he had less and less time. He remembered the website, MVIP Kanchu. 6. He left the library with the book in his arms, and decided to read Golden King and the Secret Treasure before going to bed tonight. The common room of the aristocrat courtyard was still lively. Classes would start on Monday, but the students always stayed up late on Sunday night. He sat next to Deanna and Luosi for a while, and then he went upstairs. But when he was about to unlock the door, Dake suddenly stopped. He seemed to have heard a sound from inside the door. The Shung Malian dormitory as a whole had soundproofing measures, and ordinary sounds wouldn't come out of the door. In other words, what came out of the door must be unusual. Dake frowned, and his fingers subconsciously reached into his card bag. But he thought again, and just held the magic card between his two fingers without summoning it. Gotcha! He unlocked the door and pushed it open. A small gap appeared, and the sound from inside the door roared into his ears. It was extremely noisy, as if a large number of cats and dogs had gathered together and were barking crazily. Dake's brows slightly relaxed, and then he frowned even more. He quickly squeezed through the door and locked it again, so that the noise wouldn't disturb the rest of the students. The lights in the room were turned on. The white light illuminated every corner of the dormitory. All kinds of animals were crawling on the tables, chairs, cabinets, and shelves. Dake wasn't too surprised. He kicked the fat lion that was blocking the entrance, and the big cat lazily moved to the side, making a path for him to pass through. However, there were still 2 giant bears fighting on the road ahead, and a few monkeys were kicking up a fuss while slapping their butts. The big-mouthed orange parrot flew back and forth in the air, its feathers falling everywhere. There were 2 lovebirds performing a double flight on the bird stand above their heads. The snake and the mongoose were entwined together, and the mongoose's screams pierced the eardrums. A white tiger was lying on top of the wardrobe, snoring with its eyes closed. The cats and dogs were playing around like silly dogs. Dark couldn't help but cover his forehead. From the very beginning, he had no way of dealing with this group of elves. If Red was the creator of spirit summoning, then Claire, the sage of beasts, must be the master of spirit summoning in this era. The intelligence level of this group of elves must be above 3.0. As the saying goes, the ignorant are fearless. Dake didn't know anything in the past, so he didn't think much of it. But now seeing this scene again, he couldn't help but sigh. The sage of beasts was indeed worthy of the name of a sage. He passed through the group of elves that couldn't even cook, roast, or fry, and came to the balcony of his bedroom. The balcony was the only place in the bedroom that was quiet. Claire Kate was leaning on Dake's exclusive recliner, the active catnip grass curled up on her lap, and the milkweed sleeping peacefully at her feet. The soft moonlight shone through the glass window of the balcony, illuminating half of her face, revealing a trace of tiredness. For Claire, who liked to travel around the world, to be able to arrive in Xingmalian in such a short time obviously took a lot of effort. There was no need to mention the fatigue from the long journey. Just by quietly existing here, she caused the surrounding atmosphere to become soft, and the noise behind her seemed to disappear. Dake stood at the door of the balcony for a long time. He didn't know anything when he was young, and had no worries, no sufferings, and no boredom. In the past, he didn't know what Claire had experienced, so he didn't understand why such a quiet person would become addicted to alcohol. The foundation of soul summoning was the bond between the human and the elves. The behavior of the elves was the reflection of the depths of the human's heart. She was quiet on the outside, but she was irritable on the inside. Think carefully. Yvette was her only good friend left after the war. Dake silently absorbed the memories in his mind. In his memory, Claire seemed to always sit by the bed in the dead of night, wiping an old photo that wouldn't dry no matter how hard she tried. How many people were in that photo? 1, 2, 3, was it 5 or 6? Late at night, Claire seemed to feel a trace of coolness, and she sniffed slightly. From her chest to her abdomen, there was a trace of undulation. Dake sighed, turned around, opened the closet, and took out a thick blanket. November was approaching winter, and the weather was turning cold. If she slept until dawn, she would inevitably catch a cold. He opened the door of the balcony, walked over quietly, picked up the cat grass, and carefully laid the blanket on her. Meow, the cat grass softly meowed. Dake patted its head, and hid it in the folds of the blanket. After returning to the bedroom, Dake looked up at the elves who were still noisy, and summoned the little demon beast. After using Pride 2, the little demon beast gained a second skill. Ultimate skill, Demon Hypnosis. Demon Hypnosis. Release a hypnotic wave from the eyes to hypnotize the enemy. The bedroom finally quieted down. Dake entered the bathroom, pulled out a few small animals hidden inside, and then soaked himself in the bathtub, and took a short nap. When he walked out of the bathroom, his body was still steaming. The little demon beast had already warmed the bed. He simply went in, picked up the book, Golden King and the Secret Treasure, and started to read. The novels in this era were still mainly serialized in magazines, and if the response was good, it would be released as a standalone book. Because of the limitations of the format, novels were not popular, and there were generally short and medium stories. As a novella, the plot of Golden King and the Secret Treasure was very tight. The protagonist, Joshua, and the surviving gold diggers explored in order to find the Golden King's treasure. The whole Golden City was divided into several layers because of the changes in the ground. The Golden King's tomb was also difficult to find. The movement caused by their actions awakened the Golden Guards in the Golden City, and a few unlucky gold diggers were cut in half. The blood flowing out of the corpses was instantly sucked dry by the ground. The Golden City was like a thirsty beast that finally met someone who came to deliver water, and it continued to devour one life after another. Dake gradually fell asleep and had a messy dream. Oh. Chapter 146. 3 o'clock in the morning. Claire woke up with a start from her sleep. Her forehead was covered in a thin layer of cold sweat. She opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling of the balcony. Her eyes went from blank to focused. It took her a while to come back to her senses. I'm back again. The layout of the tower dormitory hadn't changed for decades. Only the furniture had been updated. Every dormitory was a template. The space on the balcony was as narrow as ever. Claire wasn't good at socializing, and she lacked a sense of security. After school, she basically spent her time reading books on the balcony. The narrow space and the room full of animals made her feel peaceful. When it comes to animals, remember this in a second. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP she only remembered now. She got up and picked up the catnip plant. She glanced into the bedroom. She saw the magic elves that had accompanied her for half of her life sleeping peacefully in the bedroom. This made her feel a little surprised. Did Dake make this? She turned to look at the bed. Her best friend's son was nestled in the bed. There was a ball-shaped familiar with bat wings at the head of the bed. Bat? Claire yawned. She was still a little sleepy. She pushed open the door to the balcony. The magic card hidden in her sleeve shook gently. The field magic that covered the entire bedroom naturally dissipated. The magic elves turned into light at the same time, and poured into her card bag. Under normal circumstances, magic elves couldn't exist outside of the magic card for a long time. However, Claire was known as the Sage of Beasts. Naturally, she had her own specialty. Whether it was the small field card Zoo, or the large field card Animal Kingdom, they could make the magic elves of birds and beasts materialize for a long time. As long as the field card was activated, the area covered by the field magic would be her animal territory. Claire, who entered the bedroom, put the catnip plant in the sleeping basket at the head of the bed. Then, she looked at Dake on the bed with sparkling eyes. Before she came here, she had already inquired about Dake's situation from many people. However, combined with her understanding of him in the past and what she heard over the years, she felt that something was wrong. How could a person who couldn't even persevere with the most basic sword training become a model student with all-round development in moral, intellectual, physical, aesthetic, and labor? However, the blanket in her hand seemed to be silently stating a fact. Have you really grown up? Claire bent down and carefully sized up the young man she hadn't seen for a few years with a glimmer in her eyes. But it still looks so small. She reached out to poke Dake's face, and the light in her eyes grew brighter. 6 o'clock sharp. Dake suddenly woke up. For the entire night he had been having messy dreams. From the various dramas he had watched in his previous life to the various things he had experienced in this life, everything was jumbled together, causing the quality of his sleep to deteriorate. Especially the dream that he had before he woke up. It woke him up in shock. When he was about 6 years old, he was turned into a cat by an angry Claire because he tore her book. That night, he was sandwiched between Claire's breasts and almost suffocated to death in his sleep. What was even more frightening was, after that, Claire seemed to be addicted. As long as she was unhappy, she would take it out on him. As long as she couldn't sleep, she would turn him into a pillow. His mother, who usually spoiled him, was in cahoots with Claire. For several nights, she sandwiched him between her breasts, causing him so much pain that he almost developed a psychological shadow. Those nightmarish days finally ended when Claire left the Duke's mansion. But now, the devil was back. The memory lingered in his mind. Dake suddenly opened his eyes. Claire's body fragrance was very unique. It was the kind of smell that was hard to forget. The first thing he saw was Claire, who was sleeping beside him. Then he subconsciously looked down. But what appeared in his eyes wasn't a body that had turned into a cat, but a snowy body. Bliss +1. Dake's expression changed slightly. He immediately used the God of Underworld spell to empty his mind and finally stop the growth of bliss in time. For some reason, Claire didn't turn him into a cat, but she still used him as a pillow. After a short while, Dake calmed his mind and deactivated the God of Underworld spell. Claire's dignified and beautiful face was close to him, and her breath carried the fragrance of orchid. Dake quietly pulled away and tried to get down from the other side of the bed. But Claire's eyelashes moved slightly, and she opened her eyes with bright eyes. Dake's expression didn't change. "Good morning, Aunt Kate." Claire straightened up from the bed and combed her hair. "You don't mind if I stay here for the night, do you?" Only then did Dark reveal a smile. "Of course not. Didn't Principal Aerdi arrange a dorm for you?" Claire smiled. She should have arranged it. But I came earlier than she expected. I didn't want to disturb her in the middle of the night, so I came to your dorm to take a look. Dake's face darkened. "So it's not disturbing to disturb me?" Claire patted the bed. "After all, we're in this kind of relationship." The morning air was as fresh as ever. Dake and Claire walked side by side on the way to the cafeteria. Claire sniffed the surrounding air and sighed. "Ancient things are always the same." Dake said casually, "Isn't that why they're valuable?" Claire didn't say anything. Dake said again, "Aunt Kate, don't you want to talk about your travels in the past few years?" Claire shook her finger. "Do you want to know? Then I have to recommend you to buy Claire's Travels in the Week." Dake was surprised. "You're publishing a book?" Claire, "I'm a columnist for Erudite magazine." Dake, "Okay, then I'll read it when I have the chance." Claire, "Don't just ask me. Is your life in the academy going well? Did you get a girlfriend?" Dake rolled his eyes. "It takes a lot of time to maintain the dignity of a top student." The two then entered the cafeteria. Claire ordered the food with ease and greeted the older halfling chefs one by one. When she finally sat down, Professor Shi-Erfu appeared at the same time. Dake restrained himself and left the scene to Claire and Professor Shi-Erfu. They didn't immediately start talking about business. Instead, they sipped tea after the meal and reminisced about Claire's school days. Professor Shi-Erfu's tenure in the Shungmalian Academy was second only to the principal of Aerdi. She witnessed the growth of countless heroes. She also witnessed the fall of countless heroes. Time was cold and cruel. The only thing that could go against time was the feelings between people. Professor Shi-Erfu was sincerely happy that Claire returned to school. Chapter 147. The new professor's welcome ceremony was held at 6 o'clock on Monday night. As if to dilute the impact of Professor Didi's departure, this welcome ceremony was particularly grand. Claire herself was not interested in this, but for the development of her alma mater, she also tried her best to cooperate. During the stage speech, there were some unexpected episodes that happened. The first-year students of the School of Magic and the Fool's School actually prepared gifts for her and gave them to her in front of the whole school. There was also a student who gave her a bouquet of flowers with a red face. It was not because she was a new professor. It was because she was a student of Shungmalian and a hero of mankind. The first-year history of magic was on the second and fourth days of the week. Claire began preparing for class on Monday morning, and on Tuesday afternoon, she replaced Principal Aerdi and stood on the podium of the History of Magic website. https://m. But can't you? VIP. The students of the four schools were very respectful of this hero with the title of Beast Sage, so they were very well behaved at the beginning of the class. Claire smoothly went through the self-introduction section and began the formal lecture. Her teaching style was closer to that of Principal Aerdi. The story was completely out of the textbook, and it was both interesting and knowledgeable. If there was a flaw, it was that there was almost no emotional fluctuation, and the tone tended to be flat, as if she was stating facts from an objective standpoint, but there was a lack of immersion. This was also closer to Professor Didi. In short, it was easy to get sleepy after listening for a long time. But Claire seemed to be such a person. She was intellectual and rational, indifferent and wise. After the initial excitement, the little mages were no longer so excited about the addition of the new professor. Claire quickly integrated into the atmosphere of the school. And because of her beautiful image and gentle temperament, she captured the goodwill of a group of students. Although there were students who did not like her, no one dared to say more under the general trend. A week passed in the blink of an eye. The students gradually adapted to the arrival of the new professor. Claire also gradually adapted to her new identity. November 21st, Tuesday afternoon. Claire finally revealed a trace of her true nature in the third section of the History of Magic after she joined the school. She turned a sleeping student into a pig. Even though it was chubby and made people want to pick it up and pinch it, a pig was still a pig. He only called out a name. Before anyone could react, Yi Zichen's expression changed. The student who was lying on the table suffered from a nightmare. He even thought that he had not woken up yet. Anyone who suddenly woke up after falling asleep in class and realized that they had turned into a pig would probably want to escape from reality. However, the astonishment, shock, fear, and schadenfreude from the students around him gave him an extremely ominous premonition. It wasn't until Professor Claire Kate's criticism that he vaguely realized something. Looking at the humming piglet, Luobot Broheim, who had almost fallen asleep, suddenly shivered and almost screamed. He hurriedly wiped the drool off his mouth and said to White in a trembling voice, "White, am I awake now?" White, who was also sleepy, was also sweating profusely. It had been more than a week. As the craze for exploring the secret tunnels gradually cooled down, the homework assigned by the professors gradually returned to normal. After they had some free time, White and Luobot would run into the secret tunnels every night and compete with the golems in the secret tunnels. There were other people who entered the secret tunnels, but there were not many of them, so it was still manageable. Victor finally made some progress in his treasure hunting journey. However, people's energy was limited. The secret tunnels consumed their energy and made it difficult for them to concentrate in class. From time to time, someone would be late for the first class in the morning. Although White and Luobot were not late, they were not in good spirits. It showed that if they did not make progress in their studies, they would fall behind. But White couldn't care less, because the 2 flash spell materials he bought with 2,000 credits both failed. Although the magic bullet spell was successful, but he had no more credits to waste. He needed the treasure left by his father. After the end of this class, what the new History of Magic professor did in his class spread like wildfire. The originally excellent reviews began to fluctuate in an extremely short period of time. The junior students were very frightened, and the senior students were shocked by Professor Carter's high attainment in the transformation spell. Other professors would deduct credits from him. Professor Claire Carter didn't. Only turned into a pig. Although the pig transformation didn't last long, it was still a huge stain on one's academic career. They thought about what if one day after graduation they accidentally ran into a former classmate on the road. They would greet them warmly, but the other party couldn't remember their name for a while. After thinking hard, they suddenly said, "I remember, you are the XXX who was turned into a pig." They wanted to die. The junior magisters no longer dared to be absent-minded in the History of Magic class. Another week passed in the blink of an eye. Dake's magic language was at the beginning. He finally had some confidence in refining the flash spell. November 29th, Wednesday afternoon. After Dake made enough preparations, he began to refine the flash spell in the dormitory. For this day he bought an additional set of materials for the flash spell. Last weekend, the difficulty of refining the flash spell was mainly focused on the branding of the magic spell. But after self-studying the magic language, he was able to cross this hurdle more skillfully. After that, the refining process became a matter of course. Even Dake himself didn't expect that he would succeed in refining the flash spell on his first try. The flash spell was a magic spell that involved space jumping. In the old era, if a magician wanted to master this type of magic, he must be extremely talented. But in the magic era, Even a beginner like Dake could master it by refining the magic spell card. The effect of the flash spell was very direct, which was to teleport 1 to 3 meters forward. In addition to being used for emergency dodging, the most effective use was to cross obstacles such as walls. If used well, it could even save lives. Of course, the more magic spell cards like this, the better. Therefore, after Dake successfully refined the first flash spell, he immediately began to refine the second one. However, when he was refining the second one, he made a completely unknown mistake, which directly led to the failure of the refining. Fortunately, the core materials were not used. As long as he made up for some cheaper basic materials, he could start refining again. He didn't feel discouraged. Instead, he recorded the whole process. That day he found Professor Kazair. With the professor's help, he found the mistake and had a deeper understanding of the magic language. November passed just like that. Chapter 148. Autumn left and winter came. Everything was resting. With the sudden drop in temperature, Sheng Malian began to issue winter school uniforms. Although it was a winter school uniform, it was actually just a warm inner lining added to the autumn school uniform. The new January began with the dual class on Friday. Professor Cheongsi stood on the podium and carefully analyzed the dual cases. Dake, who was in the last row, closed his collar and exhaled, causing white smoke to rise. Last night he did a monthly summary. In the end, he realized that he was too lacking in self-control in November compared to October. Other than jealousy and wrath, all the other stats increased. Pride, 105-106. Jealousy, 42-41. Remember the website VIP, can't you? 6. Wrath, 94-90. Sloth, 62-64. Greed, 89-97. Gluttony, 62-64. Bliss, 111-109. There was no doubt that it was inflated. Pride had lost 3 points, but it increased by 4 points. Sloth and gluttony were still rebounding. Greed's surge was expected, but it was still too fast. There were signs of it going out of control. Bliss's value was still rising uncontrollably to 109 points after he used the flower card to reduce it by 1 point and the magic brain dropper to draw 12 points. Although he had done it on purpose, it was still not easy to deal with. If he did not tighten his self-control in December, the problem would get worse. Phew! Dark patted his cheeks so that he could clear his mind and listen more attentively. It had been 3 months since school started, and there was less than a month left before the end of the first half of the semester. To be exact, the first half of the semester would end on Friday, December 22nd. Then, Sheng Malian would welcome Christmas and a week's holiday. If you could guarantee that you could travel back and forth within a week, you could apply to go home on the 22nd and spend a warm Christmas Eve with your family. But if you couldn't, you had to stay in school. Because after this week's holiday, a new semester would begin. The second half of the semester would last from January to June, and the final exams would be held 1 to 2 weeks after June. After that, the summer vacation would begin. Due to the tight schedule, most of the teachers and students would choose to spend the Christmas holiday in the castle. Every year on Christmas Eve, the school would hold a ball and give each student a sock. It was said that as long as you waited until after 5 o'clock in the morning to open your socks, you could get a Christmas present. That was usually a surprise. So, the second intra-class competition of this semester will be held next Friday. I will record the ranking of this competition and use it as your performance for this semester. Then I will combine it with next semester's final exam to get your final results. When the class was about to end, Professor Cheongsi suddenly announced the time of the second in-class competition. When she said the first half, the little Magus was actually very excited. But when the second half came out, almost everyone pulled a long face. It can't be. It's linked to the final results? I heard that the final results can be converted into credits. Is this the meaning of taking the exam in advance? Isn't this too sudden? It didn't seem like this in the past. Is it too late to start refining new cards from today? The classroom instantly became noisy. Professor Cheongsi just narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, If you have any questions, you can raise your hand. So AI Ma was the first to raise her hand. After Professor Cheong-si called her name, she immediately asked, "Excuse me, Professor, will the rules this time still be the elite mode?" Very good question. Professor Cheong-si clapped his hands, motioning her to sit down, and then said, "This time we will use the standard duel system, but there is no limit to the minimum number of magic cards." Doran of the aristocrat house immediately raised his hand. Professor Cheong-si nodded towards him, and he immediately stood up and asked, "Then if there are fewer magic cards, won't it be a big loss?" Professor Cheong-si amiably said, "The magic cards are the result of your studies this semester. Those who are excellent in their studies will naturally have more magic cards. How can you say it's a loss?" Doran suddenly choked. In the last row near the door, White Gouda also raised her hand high. When Professor Cheong-si called her name, White asked loudly, "Excuse me, Professor, will there be a credit reward this time? Or can the ranking results be converted into credits?" Cheong-si said, "The ranking results of this in-class competition are only used as a reference for the final exam results, so it can't be converted into credits. But if you win the championship, there will be credits as a reward." White, "How much?" Cheong-si, 5,000. Hiss. The audience suddenly sucked in a few breaths. What was the concept of 5,000 credits? The winner of the first-year Crimson Star, the king of the masquerade ball, Dake Dimming, only received 5,000 credits in the event. And the champion of the first in-class competition was only 1,000 credits. Looking at the situation, would the second and third place also be rewarded with credits? Sure enough, Professor Cheong-si immediately said, "This competition is more complete, and the rewards are more comprehensive. Other than the champion, the top 10 will all be rewarded with credits." As soon as the news came out, the classroom suddenly boiled over. It wasn't easy to win the championship, but it was possible to get into the top 10. Everyone was a freshman, and no one was more important than anyone else. There would always be a chance if they fought. As for the link to the final exam results, it had already been selectively forgotten. One more week. All the students rubbed their palms together. Werther glanced at Dark, who was by the window, and hardened his resolve. Dake, who had replenished some basic materials for the blink incantation last weekend, was also thirsty for credits. But he didn't overdo it. He also didn't make up his mind. He didn't slack off during the 3 months of studying, and whether he could win the championship or not, he would let nature take its course. Instead of thinking about that, it was better to think about how to protect the insect trees after winter. In short, it was time to change the magic potions. There were 4 types of magic potions used to cultivate the insect trees, and each season was different. Among them, the winter and summer magic potions were more expensive, while the autumn and spring magic potions were cheaper. Therefore, in the afternoon after the duel class, Dake left the castle at the right time and entered Traveler's Street through the pavilion in the middle of the lake. December had just arrived, and there was already a Christmas atmosphere in Traveler's Street. Many shops hadn't even set up their Christmas trees yet, but the words "Christmas Special" were added to their flyers. Dake walked through the long street and first entered the Gugu Flower and Wood shop, and bought the winter magic potion for the insect trees. Then he turned to the cat grass and wood shop, and asked about the improvement of the rabbit grass. The shop assistant was a little embarrassed. "The improvement of the rabbit grass is really difficult to solve, but I just got a new variety. Do you want to take a look?" Begging for monthly votes. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.